Добрый день, уважаемые
Good
коллеги,
afternoon,
друзья.
colleagues, friends.
Давайте начнем.
Let's start.
Договорились с моим помощником, что мы не будем
I talked to my helper here, and
выступать. Я не
we
буду
decided
выступать
that I will not give any
пространным монологом в начале.
long opening
перейдем к
remarks
работе.
at the
Ваши
beginning. So
вопросы.
let's just start with your questions
Давайте я
straight
предлагаю
away.
по традиции начать и предоставить
Let's
вопрос одному
traditionally
из наших старейших
start
работников Кремлевского пула,
one of
который,
the journalists from the
по-моему, с
Kremlin
конца
pool,
прошлого века работает в
who's
Кремлевской
been
пуле. Это радио
working
«Маяк».
in
Валерий
the
Александрович,
pool since late 90s.
Пожалуйста.
So, Mayak
Микрофон дайте,
radio,
пожалуйста.
please. The microphone.
Радиостанция «Маяк», Вести ФМ, Радио России. Владимир Ильич,
Mayak,
заканчивается год,
Vesti
и хотелось бы
FM,
понять, в
Mr.
каком состоянии
Putin.
находится
So the year is at its
российская
end,
экономика.
and
В этом году
we'd
на совещании
like
по
to
экономическим
assess what's the
вопросам, на других
state of the
совещаниях
Russian
часто используют
economy
такие
right
термины,
now.
как
So this
турбулентность,
year you
достигли
used
дна,
such terms
подошли,
as
пробили очередное дно. Или вот можно
turbulence,
процитировать
bottoming
анекдот, который вы
out,
рассказали на
and
прошлой
such.
пресс-конференции о том, что
Or I
в
could even
2015 году все же была
quote
белая
the
полоса. Что же
joke
ближе к состоянию российской экономики на данный момент? Спасибо.
told us last year about last year being the white stripe, not the black one.
Мы смотрим на результаты нашей работы за уходящий год.
As we look at the
Эти
results
результаты,
of
они
our work
познаются в
in the
сравнении, как
outgoing
обычно.
year,
Надо
of course,
посмотреть на
everything is
основные,
relative.
прежде
So we
всего,
have to take a look
макроэкономические
at
показатели 2015 года,
basic,
и сравнить
fundamental
с тем, что у нас
indicators,
получается в
specifically
2016
macroeconomic
году. Я вот взял
indicators,
здесь
and see
нетрудно
what the situation
догадаться,
is
самые
like
последние данные.
is in
Вчера мы только с
2016.
коллегами,
I
с
looked at the
экспертами,
latest
мы
data
сидели,
yesterday.
их
I had a meeting with certain
рассматривали.
experts, certain
Итак,
colleagues last night.
основной показатель
And,
ВВП страны
The
в прошлом
basic
году у
indicator,
нас был спад
GDP,
3,7%.
decreased by
В этом году
3.8%
будет
last
тоже
year.
небольшое снижение.
This
но
year
это уже
we'll
не
see a slight
3,7.
decrease, but it's
Мы
not
думаем, что
going
это
to be
будет где-то
3.7 any
около
longer. It's going
единицы.
to be about
Потом
1%,
скорректировали,
we
сказали,
think.
что это будет
Then
где-то
they adjusted the
0,7,
figure and said it's going to be
потом 0,6.
0.7%, then they said
За ноябрь мы
0.6%.
наблюдаем
Then
небольшой
in November
рост ВВП
we
в
saw
стране.
slight growth.
И, скорее всего, погода у нас и
And
будет минус
at the end of the
0,5,
year,
0,6.
it's
За счет
likely that
чего
we'll see a
происходит этот
0.5,
рост? За счет
0.6
роста в некоторых
negative growth.
отраслях.
The reason this happens is
реального сектора
because
экономики.
we see
Это
some growth in
в машиностроении,
the real
там
sector,
у нас плюсы по грузовикам, по тяжелому машиностроению,
trucks,
по
engineering,
по дорожной
heavy
технике,
industries,
по транспортному
road
машиностроению,
construction,
по химии,
transport,
по
chemical
легкоперерабатывающей
industry,
промышленности.
light industry,
по
processing
сельскому
industry,
хозяйству, естественно.
agriculture. Of course,
Там рост
we see
вообще
growth in those
серьезный. Он,
industries. Actually, in
в прошлом
agriculture,
году у нас был
growth has been
2,6%.
quite substantial. It
В
was
этом году мы
2.6 last year, and
планировали
this year
3,2.
we
На
expected to
данный
see
момент времени
3.2%.
4,1.
Currently, we have
Погода будет меньше
4.1%
4.
growth. So it will be at least
вот,
4% at the end of the year.
По этому показателю я считаю, что динамика очень хорошая, надо ее
So
сохранить.
if you look at this indicator, I think
Как вы
we see
помните, в
some
прошлом
positive
году она
developments
даже
here.
для
The
нашей
second
экономики
indicator
была,
is the inflation
я
rate.
имею в виду, что
You may
скорость
remember
экономики
that
была достаточно высокой.
last year it was quite
Связано это
high,
было в том числе и с
even for
так
our
называемым
economy, because
импортозамещением
our
в
economy is
сельском
somewhat
хозяйстве.
special because of its structure.
Возникли некоторые
Due to
диспропорции на рынке.
our import
Мы не всё могли
substitution
заместить
programs
собственным
in
производством.
agriculture,
Но вот видите,
we were not
сельское
able to
хозяйство
replace
демонстрирует
all the
очень
imports
хорошую
in agriculture, but
динамику. И
still,
в этом
we
году
see positive developments in agriculture, and this year inflation will be very different.
Самый лучший показатель был
I'd
у нас
like to
в
remind you
2011 году. Это было
that the best
6,1%.
figure we had was in 2011, and that was 6.1%.
У нас будет
This year,
уверенно
the
меньше
inflation rate will
6%.
definitely be less than
Скорее всего,
6%.
мы так думали, что
Most
где-то будет
probably, we think
5,7, 5,8.
we thought it would be
Скорее всего, это будет
5.7, 5.8%.
5,5.
Now it looks like it's going to be 5.5, so it's going to be an all-time low inflation rate, which means that soon we'll be able to reach our target of 5 and then 4% inflation rate. The budget deficit. Last year, the budget deficit was 2.6. I think this year it will be a little larger than that. I will explain why later. Currently, after the first 10 months of the year, it's 2.4, and then it's going to be 3.7 at the end of the year. I think this is an acceptable figure because our trade balance is positive. It's over $70 billion surplus. Yes, the reserve fund has been somewhat depleted, but the National Welfare Fund remains pretty much unchanged. Our reserves stay at the level of $100 billion, and the foreign exchange reserves of the central bank have actually increased, went up from 368 to almost $400 billion. So this is quite a substantial cushion. We see an increased amount of cargo being shipped, which is also a positive indicator. Capital outflow is reducing. Let's take a look at the figures from last year. In 2014, it was $500 billion. In 2015, it was 57. In 2016, during the first 6 months, it was like $9 to $10 billion. By the end of the year, it will be up to $12 billion, I think. So on the whole, this is also quite positive. Well, do we have problems? Of course we do. We need to make sure our economy continues to grow, and we see a slight decrease in real income of the people. Of course, that's not good, and this also affects demand, consumer demand, and affects investment. But actually, we see some positive developments here as well. In the last few months, we saw a very slight, but still, increase in real wages in the real sector. So on the whole, this makes us optimistic about the future. And as far as our social programs are concerned, we see positive developments with the demographics. We see slight increase in population. The birth rate decreased a little, but the mortality rate decreased more substantially, and the overall dynamic is positive. I'd like to mention that on the whole, we are proceeding as we planned. The plan we presented to our people is being implemented positively on the whole.
Сельское хозяйство, большой желтый плакат заметный. Дайте, пожалуйста, микрофон.
Question about agriculture. You with a big yellow poster.
Здравствуйте, аграрный медиахолдинг «Светич». Меня зовут
Hello,
Сестянова Марина. Вопрос у меня про
Holding
субсидии для
Svetich. My question is about
сельхозмашиностроения.
the
На самом
subsidies
деле эти субсидии поддерживают
for
обе отрасли,
Russian
и само
agricultural machinery.
машиностроение, промышленность и сельское хозяйство. Вопрос
They support
заключается
the
в том,
industrial part of it and the
насколько
agriculture
актуальной
itself.
считаете такую
So
поддержку?
my question
Есть
is
ли планы
this:
увеличить ее
do you
объемы и сделать
think
из антикризисной меры постоянной? Спасибо.
there will be more financing involved? Are you going to make it a permanent measure, or just or will it remain an anti-crisis one?
Well, if you have anti-crisis measures, they cannot be permanent. By definition, The purpose is to overcome the crisis and achieve sustainable growth. And this is based on demand. Of course, we have to generate demand. But I think, actually, agricultural machinery, I may have said this earlier elsewhere, we see positive developments in the industry of agricultural machinery. We see significant growth there, and this affects our GDP in general. But we should realize that this particular industry and other industries should not be subsidized by the government permanently. They should operate based on demand. And the way to generate more demand is to develop agriculture. If agricultural companies have more incomes, more revenue, they can invest. So, like I said, we by over 4%, and as revenue of agricultural companies continue to grow, we'll see more money coming into companies that develop and produce, manufacture agricultural machinery as well. But next year, the government will continue subsidizing certain industries that really need government support. On the whole, we will spend 7.5 billion rubles to subsidize the industry, and 216 billion rubles for agriculture in general, so we expect to see positive effect. Since we started talking about agriculture, I expect there will be more questions about agriculture later. We are happy for our farmers. We saw that the yield really increased. This year we'll have over 119 million tons. This is an excellent result. I would like to thank everybody for this result. We've never seen anything like it in modern history, in recent history of Russia. Of course, during the Soviet period, back in the 1970s, we had sometimes even higher figures, like in 1973, 1976, but even back then, still, we did not have enough grain, enough fodder. But today, because of structural changes in the agricultural industry, we can see that this we have achieved is unique and provides us with amazing opportunities for developing agriculture further.
This sector, please. Аргументы и факты. Thank you, Alexander Kolesnichenko. This is a good opportunity to talk some more about the economic growth that you've told us about. So the world is on logical change and improvement. Without it, any growth would be impossible. So we've been talking so much about new technologies, and in your last address you talked about it a lot as well. But it seems that we are behind other countries, and quite significantly. So are we really behind? Is it forever? What do you think about it? Maybe you can tell us which spheres suffer from the most problems now.
We do have problems, and some experts believe that our economy is unable to pick up newest achievements and developments in science and research. I don't quite agree with them, though. The problem with economies like ours is that when you have petrodollars, when you have extra revenue from fuel, you can get cash easily from this industry. Other sectors tend to be underdeveloped. So, to modernize the economy, to restructure it, to diversify it, the government has been working for quite a number of years now, stimulating other sectors, particularly high-tech industries, and we've been investing less than OECD countries, for example. We've been investing less in high-tech industries. They invest about 2.4% of their GDP. In Russia, it's 1.2% of GDP. But still, this superstructure I mentioned is quite effective. First of all, we have our technology initiative program. We have a special program for the period until 2025. So in May, the government will have to report on that. We have, for example, in the forest, in East Siberia, we have priority development areas, we have high-tech clusters, special areas with special tax benefits and such. And in certain industries, like the IT industry, this special benefits have been applied for a number of years now, and they've proved quite effective. For example, quite recently, our level of exports was almost zero. Recently, I already mentioned these figures elsewhere, we export $14 billion worth of weapons, and our IT exports are worth $7 billion by now. And in some industries, we are totally competitive now. At this point, though, they may look like just isolated pockets of advanced research, but there are certain areas where we are world leaders. Well, this includes nuclear technology, of course, some other areas, aircraft manufacturing, certain areas there, the defense industry, basically, we saw a real boom there. And this will also carry over to civilian sectors as well. You know that we instructed the government to use the advantages we have in the defense industry and to apply this technology in civilian industries as well. So we should not be discouraged. We have every reason to believe that we will be leaders in many key areas, and this situation will continue for many years to come. And of course, we believe that we should be part of the global trend. We should be shifting to a new technology revolution. We should be leaders. And we have every opportunity to do so, especially considering the high level of education and science in Russia. Let me help you. I'll help you a little, picking questions, right? We have Tatarstan here, so we really need Tatars. So let's go with Tatars with the next question.
Mr. Putin, Elena Kolybakina, Business Online newspaper. The question is this. In our countries, we have a lot of problematic banks. The central bank revokes licenses all the time. And Tatarstan was also affected. Of course, the people will get their money back. I mean, when it comes to their sums. But what about small businesses? They go bankrupt. They never get their money back. So maybe we should have some insurance fund for businesses. Maybe you have plans already to solve this problem in a different way. Maybe there will only be 4 or 5 federal banks left. Do we even need regional banks?
Well, first of all, the current policy of the central bank intended to keep the banking system healthy. All the experts, both inside Russia and internationally, support it. Everybody agrees with the policy, with the current policy of the central bank. Nobody thinks it is a mistake. Everybody agrees with it. And these efforts are taken for the purpose of people, clients, first and foremost. You know, if we have banks which are basically laundromats for laundering dirty money, nothing good will come out of it. So, in order to take care of individuals, we introduced this new system of insurance. And I think, actually, the central bank has been working very close with the Tatarstan administration, the president of Tatarstan, and Tatarstan actually is one of the leaders among Russian provinces. They have been working together with the central bank, looking for ways to support people who kept their savings in those banks, and there is a certain procedure defined by the law. And certainly we'll have to take a closer look and consider how we can support small businesses, industries, well, with small and medium-sized businesses and regional banks, and not just major banks, but like you mentioned, this bank, Bank of Tatarstan, it's not a small bank, it's a rather big bank, but you may remember I mentioned this in my State of the Nation address. I said that we need a network of regional banks, smaller sized banks, and we actually can deregulate this industry a little. We shouldn't treat all the banks equally. We should have separate regulations for larger banks, like Basel III requirements for major banks, and for smaller regional banks working with the smaller businesses, with individuals. We can actually soften up our requirements a little, enable them to be more flexible in working with individuals, but we still need to ensure that there is proper equality in the banking sphere. You mentioned a specific bank, and concerning that particular situation, I'd like to mention what the central bank does, that it continues working with the leadership of Tatarstan, and they're working very closely together.
Let's go with Echo Moskvy. I can see you right there. Hello, thank you. Mr. Putin, my question also has to do with your address a little bit. So, you said that corruption cases should not become show. Well, we see a lot of those. Let's take Mr. Belyaninov. So he's devastated, but it didn't go anywhere. Or Mr. Ulukhaev. You know him well, and you became angry and you withdrew the trust you had in him. So, do you know what he has to say about the accusations leveled against him? So don't you think that these big corruption cases are just an imitation, and instead of fighting corruption, people are fighting for a place beside you? So a year has passed since Boris Nemtsov was murdered. Are you following how this case is progressing? So do you think it's going well? And as the commander-in-chief, do you think that the witness should be asked to testify?
Well, let's start with the last part of your question. Certainly, I've been following all those high-profile cases, especially like this one, the killing of Mr. Nemtsov. Certainly, I support everything what the investigators are doing. They're trying to find all those who are implicated in this case. Now, referring to your question on crimes committed by law enforcement officers, well, you know, this happens in our country, and it's also widespread abroad. And take the killing of our ambassador in Turkey. Who killed that man? You know who did it. So certainly we will continue to find all those who are involved in it. On all the high-profile cases, regardless how much time it takes, investigators usually find out all the details. You remember the Starovoytova case and other cases. Unfortunately, we still don't know all the details of the killing of Mikhail Manevich. And we were friends, we knew each other very well, but unfortunately it's not possible to find out who's behind that. As for other high-profile crimes, like Mr. Belyaninov, well, actually there was no case against Mr. Belyaninov. There's some, there were searches, there were some operations conducted before the charges were brought, and this was unacceptable. Those leaks were unacceptable. Certainly, they have an impact on the reputation. As for Mr. Ulykayev, I did not speak with him. The evidence that was provided by the law enforcement officials are enough to dismiss him because of lack of trust. I don't know what's going to happen, how the case is going to end up, but we will be waiting for the court to rule. Before that, I don't think it's expedient to make any conclusions, and it's even harmful to do that.
Vyacheslav Terechov, please. One of our most respected members of the Kremlin pool.
Well, you're always applauding the Kremlin pool correspondence.
Well, we've been working together for so many years now, that's why. Mr. Putin, for 5 years, we've been implementing the 11 decrees and 270 provisions. But we don't have any money for that. There are budget cuts. So, selling the Rosneft. SPU. So, the banks are under sanctions, and is our country ready to sell stakes in other big companies, corporations?
Well, it could take me several hours to respond to your question, because you referred to the federal budget, you referred to privatization, you referred to the so-called May decrees. So there are three major areas. As for the budget, indeed, we have a conservative estimate as our benchmark. We believe that the price of oil will be $40 per barrel for next year. And if we look at the expenditure side, then it will have to go down from 18 plus to 16 plus something, but in absolute figures, it will be a constant one, and in 2018 and 2019, it will be 15.8 trillion rubles. If you add up the 5,000 ruble payouts to pensioners, and it will be about 16.1 trillion rubles. But again, we have the money for the Social Security program, including for the implementation of the so-called May decrees from 2012. We will also continue our support for the industry. It will be 2.6% of GDP. It will be even bigger than this year. This year we had 2.2 to 2.3% of GDP. And certainly the biggest cuts will be done in national security, in the defense sector. In 2011, we spent 2.17% of our GDP. Sorry, 2.7. A correction has to be made. 2.7% of GDP was spent on defense, and certainly these expenditures have been increased over the past 5 years. But in 2016 it will be 4.7, but then we'll go down 3.3, and then in 2019 it will be 2.8. So we will decrease our defense expenditures. Certainly, this will not have an impact on our plans to increase our military capabilities. As I said, in the past 5 years, we spent a lot of money on upgrading the army, and we're also paid off the debt to defense enterprises. And also, we are selling the stakes in the state-run companies, not just because we lack money for specific items of expenditure. There are actually several factors that we take into account that improves the stature of the economy. We have new shareholders, so this will be the Glencore trading company from Switzerland and Qatar's sovereign fund. So we believe that the presence of new shareholders, we will improve the corporate governance standards. Well, anyway, it's considered one of the best companies in terms of governance anyway. And again, the budget income has already included that part, the sale of a stake in Rosneft. Well, thank you for reminding me. Will these foreigners send us the money for the sale of 19.5%? Well, the money has been transferred. They paid the money already to the federal budget in full. As for Bashneft, Rosneft paid itself 300+ billion, and the foreigners already sent in their money, around 700 million. So the government already received 1.1 trillion rubles. Now I'd like to give the floor to some of our Western colleagues.
Wall Street Journal, please. Thank you, Mr. President. Nathan Hodge, Wall Street Journal Bureau. Is it possible that the presidential election will take place next year?
Which country? Early election in which country?
In Russia.
It's possible, but it's not expedient.
Thank you. Yesterday, you said about strengthening the military potential of Russia's nuclear forces. Could you please tell us some more about that?
Could you please make your question more precise? What do you mean by that? What is of biggest interest to you from my statements, the Ministry of Defense?
Well, in particular, I wanted to ask about manufacturing new types of nuclear weapons. We know it's hard to do without testing, which is forbidden. So maybe you could also comment on Mr. Trump's statement that he made yesterday about nuclear weapons.
As for the newly elected President of the United States, Donald Trump, well, there's nothing new about it. During his election campaign, he said that the U.S. needs to bolster its nuclear capabilities and its armed forces in general. There's nothing new, and to be honest, I'm a bit surprised by the officials of the Obama administration. They started to prove that the U.S. Army is the most powerful in the world. No one argues that. No one challenges that. If you listen carefully to what I said, then I said that we were certainly improving our nuclear capabilities. And at the end, I said that Russia today is stronger than any potential aggressor. It's very important. I used that word, aggressor, and I didn't use that word accidentally. Who is an aggressor? An aggressor is the person who can potentially attack Russia. So we are stronger than any potential aggressor. And I can repeat that statement again. And I said, why? Because we upgraded our armed forces, because of our history and geography, and because of the state of our society. So it's a comprehensive situation, a number of factors. And certainly the upgrade in the armed forces, including the improvement of the nuclear capabilities, have a large role to play. And it's no secret that we've overhauled our nuclear capabilities to a great extent. That has to do with the missiles, strategic missiles, ground-based missiles, and sea-based missiles too. And we don't hide anything. Certainly, we put into operation new submarines that can carry missiles, and also air-based systems. Now, in terms of the aircraft and in terms of strike systems that they have, the missiles, there's been an improvement, but I'd like to reiterate that we act in full compliance with all of our treaties, including with the New START Treaty. I'd like to go back to what I feel is really important. In 2001, the US pulled out of the ABM Treaty. This was the cornerstone of all the international architecture of security. We were told back then is that it's not directed against you. Well, as I said, we would have to respond somehow. That's what I told my counterpart. As I said, we would have to, somehow improve our own systems. They said, do whatever you do, and again, it's not directed against you. Well, that's what we've been doing. Many seem to ignore that, but what is actually happening is what we agreed on by default. Without any papers signed, there's nothing new happening in this area. Why does the Obama administration officials started saying that they are the strongest, that they're the most powerful? I don't know. Well, certainly you have a lot of missiles and submarines, and more submarines than Russia. We don't argue that. We don't challenge that. We're just saying that we are stronger than any aggressor, and this is true.
Let's go with Crimea, please. Maxim Nikolaenko, Kriminform. Well, our publication is just a week older than Crimea. We have different opinions in Crimea about this period since we joined Russia. And maybe that's because we don't have the full information, but that's not the case with you. You have all the information from different sources and reports. So how is Crimea developing now? How is it integrating into the Russian economy? Maybe you have to answer that very often, but still. There is a development program, but it's not going very well. It's under 5%. That's the approximation. So it's very difficult to see which spheres should be developed in Crimea. And we have objective reasons for that. We don't have enough energy resources, and thank you for the supply. We have our own natural gas, but we do need extra resources. We're waiting for more gas, we're waiting for stations to be built. And let's also talk about the bridge. So we call it the Crimea Bridge, but Muscovites associate that name with a different place. So what would you call that bridge?
Well, you just said it's Kerch Bridge. Well, I didn't invent that. It was my idea to build it, and it's up to you to name it. By the way, these projects were initiated, as early as the Tsarist times. Then the Soviet authorities tried to build it. Then, the Nazi Germany tried to build it. But they did it in a poor way. It was carried away, but I hope that one day we will normalize our relations with Ukraine, and it will be very helpful for humanitarian and commercial ties with Ukraine. So it's very good for the future, and certainly that will help to improve the economy. So it's not just to attract more tourists. As for your question on integration and the progress in it, You might know that the program that you were referring to, the 2020 program, so it offers quite preferential provisions. It's like a free economic zone. But actually, it turned out that both legally and economically, integration has been far more difficult than we expected. And it's not everything that depends on the federal authorities. You need timely and efficient management, thrifty management of the resources that have been allocated. But even in this, there is a problem for the local government. It's hard for people to understand of how to align those processes with the Russian legislation. What kind of administrative procedures have to be used? It takes time. Certainly, it's underway. And I believe overall we have a good pace. You remember I said that industrial production has been on the increase, and on some of the industries, there's quite a significant growth, up to 20%. Overall, there will be, well, about between 0.7 to 0.9%. That's the average. While in Crimea, we have 6%. As for Sevastopol, it's 25% of growth in industrial production. That's all due to the fact that federal agencies, federal companies, nationwide companies have placed their orders with Crimean companies. And also, the level of unemployment is low. And I'd like to go back to one of the first questions. It used to be 5.6, 5.7. This year we have 5.5. Well, in Crimea, it's even lower, and that's very good. It's a positive sign. What areas could be promising for Crimea? Definitely, it's ship repairs, ship construction, some of the segments of the chemical industry, agriculture. Actually, we allocated 3 billion rubles for the support of agriculture. That's 5 times more than last year and tenfold more than in 2014. You just need to spend that money in an efficient way and certainly achieve payback on that money. And certainly you need to develop tourism. Once this bridge is put into operation, the number of tourists will increase. And I certainly want the high-tech sector to develop in Crimea, without any impact on the environment. We need to create high-tech jobs, good-paying jobs. If you look at the pay level in Crimea, it's a bit lower than Russia's average. In Russia, we have 35,000 rubles. Across Crimea, it's 24,000, and in Sevastopol, it's 25,000 rubles. But I'm sure things will improve, definitely. Just need to take steps that regional authorities have a decent level, the same as the country's average. I have no doubts that in a while things would improve. We have Russia's regions where the pay is lower than in Crimea, but certainly Crimea has a lot of potential. You need to understand that. And I'm sure that we'll see some growth there. We first need to resolve issues that have been unresolved for decades. Certainly it's the healthcare sector. We need to have a good clinic in Simferopol. We'll also have another clinic near Yalta. So certainly training is important. People have never worked on modern equipment, but we will certainly resolve those issues. We will work together with you.
I can see Ms. Primakova there. Probably a question about international affairs. Evgeny Primakov. Mr. Putin, the world is undergoing a fundamental change. We can see people voting against the old political ideas, old political elites. There was Brexit, and many people say that that's why Trump won, because people voted against the political elite. So have you discussed these changes? And during the General Assembly session, you said that you asked whether they understood what they've done. So right now we're in this interesting period. So you mentioned the discussion about whose army is stronger, and your counterpart, Mr. Obama, said that 37% of Republican voters like you. And sure, we as Russian voters appreciate your popularity, and apparently you are so powerful that you can influence the results of the elections. So, do you feel like the most influential man in the world?
I have repeatedly made statements on that. If you want me to say it again, okay, I'll do that. Every attempt by the current administration, by the leadership of the Democratic Party, to find a scapegoat for its failures, well, I have a number of ideas on that. We know that the Democratic Party lost not just the presidential election, they lost the Senate elections, they lost the Congress elections. Well, is this I'm to blame? Well, are we responsible for everything? Are we the scapegoats? It just signals that the current administration has systemic problems. I spoke about that at the Valdai Discussion Club. There's a gap between the perceptions of what is good and bad with the elites, and so the perception with the grassroots. The fact that 30% of Republican voters support a Russian president. Well, I'm not to be thanked for that. It means that the vast majority of the US population, have the same ideas of the world order, of the threats and challenges, common threats and challenges. And this is good, that there are people who share our traditional values. This could help us to build better relations between such powerful countries as Russia and the US. This is a good foundation. People have a liking towards each other. They share the values. Well, it's not good to recall former presidents. I think Mr. Reagan would not roll in his grave, but he would rather rejoice at the fact that his party is winning across the board, and certainly he would be happy that the new president has been elected. You know, certainly only we knew that he's going to win. None except us believed he's going to win. Now, if you look at the legendary democratic leaders, they would roll into their graves like Mr. Roosevelt. Even in the most difficult times of the Great Depression, at the end of the 90s and during World War II, he united the nation. The current administration has split the nation. And the call on the electors not to vote for Trump is a step towards dividing the nation. And two electors didn't vote for Trump, and for Hillary, there were 4 electors that didn't vote for Hillary. So even on this, the Democratic Party lost, and I think that's a blow to them. It's a humiliation for them. If you lose, you need to lose with dignity. So I would like to have, both with the newly elected president and with the leader of the Democratic Party, to have business-like constructive relationship that would serve the best interests of the US and Russia, and certainly the interests of our nations. Now, I'm sorry. Optimist from Vologda. Yes, please.
We should talk to somebody from the core parts of Russia.
So let's go back to economy and imports, whether we could be self-sufficient. So do you think we should create a club in Russia that would include the most prominent businessmen that have been very successful in terms of imports? So, when there is a business that manages to produce something of quality and gets a lot of profit, and then spends that revenue on expanding. And another question is, and another thing is the rebuilding of Orthodox churches. So millions and millions of rubles are invested, and this is a very large sum. And what's your take on it?
I'd like to thank people who work on such projects, who help rebuild churches, not just Orthodox churches, the same goes for synagogues and other places of worship. For all of our traditional religions, including Islam, including Buddhism. For example, in Moscow, we have certain problems with the Buddhist temple, and we will certainly help them with that. You mentioned import substitution. You said either we win or we'll have problems. We will always have problems, but we will definitely win. There is no doubt about that. Import substitution works. For example, with the industry, we've reduced our imports by 10 percentage points. Used to be 49%, now it's 39%. That's quite substantial. We've taken serious steps in import substitution with a whole number of sectors. Pharmaceuticals, for example, the chemical industry, light industry, let alone heavy engineering, road construction machinery. Now almost 100% of road construction machinery is manufactured in Russia, let alone the defense industry. We've had serious structural changes, and it's very important, especially with the defense industry, to be technologically independent from others. We spoke about agriculture earlier. I mentioned that inflation was higher last year, this year, because agricultural production grew, and for some other reasons as well, but partially because of that, the inflation rate is much lower this year. So, I don't have any doubt that we will get the result. We are not going to be isolated. We want to develop our economy, and we'll certainly develop our high-tech sectors, and we definitely have to be integrated into the global economy for that, and we will do that. But in areas where we take new steps, new areas, we'll certainly do that, and I'm positive that we'll get the results we need.
In that sector, please, советский спорт.
Николай Еременко, советский спорт.
Nikolai Еременко from Советский спорт. We are the oldest sports publication in the country, 92 years old, and we've seen a lot over the time, and we're very concerned, and it seems sometimes that we are more concerned than some officials. So after the two reports by Mr. McLaren, some officials were fired or, let's say, transferred. So, after all these decisions and measures, can we say that the situation with doping is improving, or is it not enough yet? And another question about WADA. Do you think it could be reformed, or maybe some other organization will substitute it? It's not just a question of sports. We see a political aspect here. Do you think there is one?
First of all, we've never had a doping program in Russia. This is just impossible, unthinkable, and we'll never do anything like that. There is no government support program for doping in Russia. That's number one. Number two, like any other country, we have problems with doping, and we should do our best to fight it. We should work very closely with the International Olympic Committee. We should work together with the WADA and other international bodies, and we will definitely do that. I hope that the changes that are currently taking place, and it's not just some personnel decisions you mentioned, there are structural changes as well. I hope that those changes will help us address the situation, and the investigative committee, the prosecution service are investigating everything related to doping, and this investigation will be carried out to the end. You mentioned some informers that fled to some other countries, and they report. I don't even remember the name of this person who fled, the guy who was chief of our anti-doping agency. What was his previous workplace? He used to work in Canada, and what he did later, he came to Russia and he was appointed to a high position, and he used this to bring all sort of bad things into Russia. I think when he crossed the border in Canada or in the US, and he brought all those banned substances into Russia. Many of you travel, you know there is very strict control at the border, but somehow he was able to bring all those banned substances into Russia. I don't believe that the authorities there were unaware of this. And he forced our athletes to take those substances, and when some swimmers refused to take them, he punished them, found a way to penalize them. And then he fled to some other countries, and he has a nice life there, and he complains about Russia, hoping that they will provide nice conditions for him there. And definitely for some time he will have a nice life there, but then they will just forget him and kick him out. And that's what always happens. So I think that he had some patrons there, and then they waited for the right time to come, and then they attacked Russia. This doesn't mean, of course, that we don't have problems with doping in Russia. We definitely have those, and we should fight them. We should take care of our athletes, their health. Now, you also asked about WADA. It's not up to me to comment on its performance. It's up to the IOC to do that. But I strongly believe that any anti-doping agency, including WADA, should be A, transparent, clear, should be verifiable, and we should know about the results of their work. What I mean is that the international athletic community should all know who was tested, what the results were, and what action was taken in order to punish those guilty. What has been done to prevent this from happening in the future? Are these security issues? Why are they so secretive? Why do they keep all those things under wraps? We all want transparency, right? So it's absolutely necessary to be transparent in these matters. I fully agree with the world-known athletes who commented on the recent decisions to move international competitions. They say, do they really mean that they didn't know about this before? Of course there is a political aspect to it. Sports should be separated from politics, from geopolitics, because sports should bring people together instead of dividing them.
So, our colleagues from Altai, please, this sector. Алтайская правда. Mr. Putin, I want to ask you how the problem of regional loan debt is solved. And my second question is whether the provinces are going to be granted more power over finances. So our province is in debt, it's 6%. So are you going to support the provinces that have good financial policy and don't take loans?
The government supports all the different provinces. With donor regions, of course, we help them to stay this way, like Moscow province. We do a lot we invest a lot in the infrastructure in Moscow, in the Moscow area, in transport, for example. And we do the same with other places like St. Petersburg. Just recently, we launched a new road there that will be very helpful for the entire northwestern part of Russia. And there are other examples in other parts of Russia as well. You asked about public debt in different provinces. This is a very serious issue. According to our rules, the debt of a certain province should not exceed 50% of its internal revenue. And the situation with Altai is quite positive. This means that the Altai government has a very proper, balanced monetary, financial policy, budgetary policy. Actually, there are only 5 provinces in Russia that have violated this rule. And they, of course, require special support, special attention. But on the whole, I have to say this is a serious issue. The public debt of different parts of Russia is over 2 trillion rubles. Even though the government takes necessary steps to address this problem, last year, for example, this year, we've allocated 380 billion rubles to provide bridge loans to refinance this debt, withdraw those loans from commercial banks and move them to government, finance ministry loans, which have lower interest rates, almost 0 interest rates. We'll continue this work in the future, and next year, by the way, we also have allocated sufficient funds for this issue as well. Let's go to the BBC.
Here in the center, please.
Thank you. I'd like to ask the question in English, if that's okay. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News. Mr. President, your country has been accused of state-sponsored hacking with the aim of influencing the result of the US presidential election. Indeed, President Obama has hinted very strongly he thinks that you are behind that. He said that not much happens in Russia without Vladimir Putin. And President Obama revealed that he told you personally to cut it out. So what did you tell him in response? And can you confirm that you were warned by Washington not to tamper with America's election, warned in a message via the so-called red phone, the crisis line between your 2 countries? And finally, just coming back to the point about Donald Trump's tweet yesterday, are you not concerned, though, that there is a danger of a new arms race if America is talking about boosting its nuclear arsenal? Thank you.
A new arms race. Conditions for a new arms race then the other party has to create a similar umbrella, and we are not sure if we want to do that. At least at this point, we don't think this program can be effective. Or the other option is to create capabilities for penetrating missile defense and to improve our nuclear strike capabilities, and this is what we have been doing. It's not something that we did. We had to respond to this challenge, and we've made quite substantial progress with that. Yes, that's true, we've been doing that, and it's quite effective, but we still stay within the framework. We don't violate anything. We still are in line with all our obligations as to the number of warheads. Just recently, US monitors went to our nuclear sites and monitored the way we produce nuclear warheads. Do you remember that? And instead of keeping our relationship like that, the United States withdrew from the ABM Treaty. It was not us. They did it. Yes. Yes, we've improved our nuclear triad, our nuclear systems, our missile defense penetration capabilities. This system is much more effective than the missile defense system. That's true. And perhaps this is why they're so anxious to enhance their nuclear capabilities as well. We are aware of that, and they have been doing that anyway. For example, they've been tactical nuclear weapons in Europe, including your country, the United Kingdom. This has been going on, and I really hope that your audience are aware of that. Turkey, UK, the Netherlands, Americans are upgrading their nuclear weapons deployed there. So, if somebody is stimulating a new arms race, it's certainly not us. But I would like to emphasize, and this is more for internal, domestic conceptions, I would like to say we'll never join an arms race, and we will never spend the kind of resources that we can't afford. At the beginning, earlier, when I answered some other questions, I said that in 2011, we spent 2.7% of our GDP on defense. Then it was 4.7, then it's 3.3, and we'll keep it like that, because we've done everything we need. We've taken care of our basic needs with modernizing our weaponry, and now by 2021, 70% of our weapons will be modern weapons. Currently, the level is 50 to 60%. It's 60 with nuclear forces, or even 90%. So we are happy with the situation. We just proceed according to plan. Now, you mentioned tampering and our conversation, my conversation with President Obama. You may have noticed that I never reveal the contents of our conversations one-on-one. You mentioned tampering. So, I already mentioned to your colleague from the United States, losers always look for a way to accuse somebody else. They should look at themselves first. And they always forget the most important thing. And the most important thing, I think, is that, let's say some hackers hacked Democratic Party emails. Some hackers did it. Okay. And like the president-elect said, who knows who those hackers were? Maybe they were not in Russia, maybe they were in some other countries, maybe it was just some guy lying on a sofa, on a couch. And, you know, now it's easy for them to blame it on some other country. That's not the most important thing, though. The most important thing is what was revealed. It's not like they invented something, they came up with some information. No, true information was revealed, truth came out, as evidenced by the fact that after they revealed how the Democratic Party has been manipulating public opinion in favor of one candidate against the other candidate, against Mr. Sanders, the head of the Democratic Party leadership resigned, and this indicates that this was true. This was actually true. And instead of apologizing and promising never to do that again, what they did is they started looking for people who hacked into their emails. That's not really important, right? And as for my private conversation, my conversation one-on-one with President Obama, I never reveal the contents of those conversations, you know. I know that there were reports that it was his advisor, his helper, who revealed the contents of this conversation. You can talk to Mr. Peskov. He is my helper, he's my aide. You can talk to him about that. Okay, there's a question about environment. I'm sorry, environment is really important, so let's go to this person now with a question on environment.
Mr. Putin, thank you for this opportunity to ask a question. I'd like to wish you a Happy New Year. to you and everyone in this room and in the country. So, my question is about environment. 2017 is going to become the year of environment, and you signed a decree. There will be a meeting concerning the environmental development of Russia for future generations, and that's the first time this is worded this way, future generations. So, the officials, do you think they won't be the reason why the upcoming environmental year is going to be ruined? So I have a newspaper, and 2013 was also announced as the year of environment, but it was ruined, it was a failure, and you admitted that.
You caught me.
So, I have some specific suggestions, and I have a lot of experience. So this meeting is going to take place on December 27th. Could I maybe attend it? So maybe Russian embassies in other countries should have some environmental departments that would deal with environmental policies in the world, because the West is not taking care of environmental problems right now. They are busy with other things, like wars. But Russia, on the contrary, is paying more and more attention to the environment these days. And the most important thing, we need to change the policy, the media policy, so that it talks more about that environment is at the forefront, because we have some entertainment shows, but if we change the mindset, then we won't have to deal with corruption and other problems. People's mental health would be much better. So that's my question.
Right. So you said that we failed in 2013, but at the same time you say that we've done a lot to preserve nature. And you also criticized us, you criticized our Western partners and what they do. I don't quite agree with what you say about Western countries, the United States and Europe. I don't think that they care less about environment now. And I can just give you this example, what the French president did for the Paris Treaty, you know, on emission reductions. What France did was tremendous. And they were quite successful with it. It was not easy, but we've agreed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And you know that Russia made some serious commitments and will fully respect those. I don't know about other countries. It's hard to tell at this point, because we need to consider ways to implement those agreements. But we are ready for this work. We need to consider the technological aspect of those agreements, how those Paris agreements will be implemented, but we are certainly going to do that. As for our domestic policies, environment protection has always been very important for us, and we will continue to care about environment. We want to pass on to future generations our environment in a very proper shape. I care a lot about pollution, all those landfills. Just recently, we had a large meeting with the Popular Front activists, and we discussed this issue in much detail. I won't go into details right now, but there is a special government program for that, and we'll certainly do that. Then there is forest preservation. This is a serious issue as well, and we will certainly have to change some of the regulations to address this problem. Of course, the wood processing industry needs resources, and we have to consider that as well, but it is equally important to care about our forests, to preserve them. Because otherwise, if we don't care about our forests and parks properly, we'll have nothing left around our cities. Because, of course, it's cheaper and easier to get wood in those areas because you have roads there, you have infrastructure. We have to consider the situation very carefully with organizations like yours, and I'm very thankful to you and other environmental media, to people who go to these woodcutting sites and are not afraid of anything. I encourage you to continue with this work, and I invite you to join the meeting of the State Council. Please note that we want this person to join the meeting of the State Council on Environment in December. We have another question on pensions now. This is an extremely important question. So let's talk about that now.
Good afternoon, Yulia Izmailova. My question is this. Some of our citizens retire early, but there have been more and more cases of teachers and doctors having to go to court to protect their right of early retirement. So, another question is, what are pensioners to expect next year?
You know that just recently, in the 90s and in the early 80s, the level of pension was not based on your labor history, and people would all get the same amount of money as their pension, and many people pointed out that this was not fair, and we made some serious changes in the system. Well, what's the point of those changes? And currently, our pension system is based on three pillars. First, your labor history, your labor record. Then, what kind of salary you had before you retired. And third, your age at which you started to get pension. And, these three key figures is what the pension system is based on, and this will remain unchanged. We will continue to work with these three key fundamental factors as we reform our pension system. Now, you asked about early retirement. This is one of the issues which requires special attention. We need to analyze the situation properly. We have a lot of people who retire early. I don't want to anticipate anything right now and tell you about our planned reforms, but I'll just mention one thing. Before changing anything, we have to discuss these things publicly, openly, and we will only make those decisions after we carefully consider the situation. In the nearest future, I can tell you that just like we planned earlier this year, we'll pay out 5,000 rubles to all pensioners, regardless of how much they get regularly. This includes military pensioners. Actually, for many pensioners, these 5,000 rubles will be actually more than the indexation they would normally receive at the end of the year. And next year, we have enough funds in our budget to index pensions for retirees for inflation as per 2016. So we will go back to regular indexations, and starting with April 1st, social pensions will be indexed as well.
давайте и Тартас, а то у нас как-то такие информационные гранды чуть-чуть остались за бортом.
A Tartas, please. TASS in Iran, Romanenkova. My question is about Ukraine. The Ukrainian crisis is frozen now. It seems that the parties to the conflict have stopped listening to each other a long time ago. And how efficient is the Normandy 4? How do we change things? Are these meetings that you have with leaders of Ukraine, France, and Germany changing anything? So, your opinion also on the visa-free regime between the EU and Ukraine?
There was another question on Ukraine, and I'll then respond to both of your questions.
This is a Ukrainian journalist who's been working in Moscow for a long time. I'm not sure you can answer both of our questions, but recently Russia has a lot of Ukrainian citizens arrested, and even the problem is the cases against Ukrainian citizens look politically motivated, and I would like to ask you to free Mr. Sushenko. I'd like to be more specific now. You often say that you had to protect the Russian-speaking population in Donbass. And last year you said that you never concealed the fact that you sent some people to solve some issues in Donbass. So please tell me, where is this written in the Minsk agreements? So when you retire, Russians are going to stay occupants for Ukrainians. Thank you for your comments.
It would be great if the Ukrainian army wouldn't be considered as occupants in Donbass and their own country. That's what you should focus on. The Ukrainian army should not be considered as occupants in Donbass. Now, on releasing prisoners, we do everything so that prisoners captured by both sides would be exchanged, and more people would be exchanged, the better. President Poroshenko once said that there should be an all-for-all exchange, and I personally agree with that. But later on, it turned out that there are some details and reservations which Donbass representatives are not satisfied with. And that means that all those who have been captured by Donbass are considered to be held illegally. But there is a significant number of individuals that are kept in Ukraine's prisons, and those Ukraine's authorities consider as legally held, and they don't want to include those, they don't want to put them on the lists. So if it's a all-for-all exchange, then you need to issue an amnesty law and release all of them. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to find a consensus. Now, as for journalists and directors, journalists and directors have to do what their profession tells them to do. As for the servicemen of Ukraine's army, which were captured, those from the military intelligence of Ukraine, no one tortured them, no one beat them up. They confessed, and it's very easy to check whether they are actually officers of the Ukrainian military on payroll. They give not just the full context, they give the name of their units, the names and the rank of their commanders, the tasks that they were given, the contacts on the territory of Russia and on the territory of Crimea. They've released all that information. They revealed all that, and every piece of information corroborates the other. So this needs to be stopped. This practice needs to be stopped. And if Kyiv has this political will, then it will be easier to resolve other issues. Now, going back to journalists and film directors, no one has a desire to keep journalists if they are really journalists. But what do we have to do if a film director, and that's been proven in court, was preparing to stage a terror act? Should we release him just because he's a TV director? Should we release him but keep the military officers? In what way is he different from the military officers? If we release those, then others would come tomorrow. We just need to agree that you have to put a lid on it. This has to be stopped. Perhaps we should think about amnesty law. And a question by TASS. As you rightly said, it was difficult to align those two questions. So the Minsk agreements, the Normandy 4 group, and
your opinion on the possibility of a visa-free regime between Ukraine and the EU.
As for the Normandy 4 group, indeed, it has not been extremely efficient, I should say, and regrettably, its activities have not been as intense as desirable, but we don't have any other alternative. And I believe that we need to continue working within this framework. If we lose this tool, then the situation would degrade very quickly, and that's something we would like to avoid. As for the visa-free regime between Ukraine and the EU, I fully support this. Furthermore, I believe that a visa regime in Europe is a remnant of the past, a remnant of the Cold War, and we need to get rid of it as soon as possible. And if Ukrainian citizens will be eligible for visa-free travel to Europe, this will be the right step forward. But from what I know, well, this will be an opportunity to get a visa, but without the right to work. But will that increase the inflow of migrant workers to Europe? Yes. You know, according to unconfirmed data, we have about 3 million workers from Ukraine here in Russia. And if there will be visa-free regime with Europe, then some of people from Russia, some of migrant workers from Russia will move to Europe. I mean, Ukrainians. And certainly this will pose some serious pressure on the labor market. But if the right to work will not be given, then people who will come to Europe will face a lot of challenges. They would have to work illegally. They would only be allowed to come for 3 months, work, then go back to Ukraine, and then go back to the EU. It means that they would be not socially protected. They won't enjoy any social benefits, and they would be exploited to the fullest extent. So if you allow the visa-free travel, you need to allow the right to work. Let's have Turkey.
And then Channel 1, after Turkey.
Fuat Safarov, агентство «Спутник», турецкая редакция.
Sputnik, Turkey. Mr. Putin, Russia and Turkey managed to resolve one of the issues in the Syrian conflict without the support of the West, I mean Aleppo. So there is potential there. In the future, will Ankara and Moscow be able to use this potential? Will Iran, Turkey, and Russia be able to stand against the games being played in the Middle East? So this alliance, will it be able to play a key role in the resolution of the Syrian conflict? And the second question, in October 2015, you made some agreements with Erdogan about Syria, and then Russian plane was downed. And then normalization started, and then there was a coup attempt. So now that Turkey and Russia is cooperating on Aleppo, the Russian ambassador was killed in Ankara. Do you think this is a coincidence?
Let's start with the last part, with the tragedy that took place recently. The assassination of our ambassador. I think it was actually an attempt on Russia, on Russian-Turkish relations. I was skeptical of the idea that the Russian aircraft was shot down without the consent of the Turkish leadership. As you remember, some of them stated that it was just done by some individuals who wanted to interfere with the relations. But right now I'm might change my opinion. You know, everything is possible. You might have destructive elements in the government, there's a deep level of infiltration in the Turkish army, in the Turkish law enforcement officials. Certainly I don't want to find a scapegoat to put a finger at somebody, but that's really happening. Will that damage Russian-Turkish relations? No. Because we are fully aware of the importance of Russian-Turkey relations, and will certainly do everything to develop them. Certainly we'll keep in mind the interests of Turkey, but certainly we'll also take into account our own interests. In the past year, we were able, well, after we normalized our relations, we were able to find the compromises we needed. So I hope that we'll be able to continue finding consensus going forward. Now, as for Aleppo, indeed, the situation was resolved, and certainly, as you remember, some of the villages were deblocked, and these villages were populated by a Shia majority, and certainly the big role was played by the leadership of Iran and the president of Turkey. But certainly, without Russia, it would be impossible. I don't want to brag about that, but that's true. So this trilateral cooperation certainly plays a critical role in resolving the Aleppo crisis. And what's also of paramount importance, especially at the final stage, I just got the report of the defense minister. There were no hostilities. Hostilities were stopped. Dozens of thousands of people were evacuated in Aleppo. And it's not just the radical groups, it was women and children who were evacuated. We're talking about 100,000 people. And also thousands of other people were evacuated from other villages in exchange for this operation. This is the biggest, again, this is the biggest humanitarian operation in the world, and certainly it could not have been achieved without an active cooperation by the Turkish president, by the leadership of Iran, the Iranian nation, and certainly we had the goodwill and the work that was conducted by the Syrian president, Mr. Assad, and his government. So practice showed that this kind of cooperation is indeed in demand. That's been very helpful. But certainly we need to think about Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and certainly we should not forget about the US. That's why we're ready to work with every stakeholder. Now, to close this issue, further on, we need to sign an agreement for ceasefire across all the territory of Syria, and after that, we would need to start practical negotiations on the political reconciliation. We suggested that Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan, could be such a venue. The president of Iran, the president of Turkey agreed to that, and President Assad said yes. President Nazarbayev of Kazakhstan said that certainly he would create all the conditions for this, and I really hope that this will happen.
This is becoming a habit. Anton Vernitsky, Channel 1. My question is about taxes. So there is income tax and property tax, and they've been increased over the years. But apart from the taxes that we pay, there are also certain fees and tariffs, like building renovation or healthcare. It's supposedly free, but some services are not. Or education, additional education we need to pay money for. Or parking in Moscow. Of course, in the center, everyone's used to parking, paying for parking, but now the same will probably happen in residential area. So are we to expect something new in this sphere?
You know, you have to differentiate between taxes and non-tax fees. First, we have the income tax, individual income tax. You have the transport tax and the property tax. These are the three taxes for individuals. They remain among the lowest in Europe. Let's start with income tax for individuals, 13%, a flat rate. You might remember that it was introduced back in 2001. There were a lot of doubts. I also had doubts. I fear that the budget would lose a large share of income because those who earn more would have to pay less. What about social equality and things like that? I mentioned that several times, but I'd like to reiterate it. After we introduced that flat rate of 13% on income tax for individuals, the tax take increased 7 times, and the money that we receive into our budget are then redistributed for social protection programs. So this ensures social equality. Can we move to a differentiated tax rate? Perhaps it would be done someday, but at this point in time it doesn't make sense. Because when we do this, then, we might get entangled in that differentiation, and eventually this would lead to less money in our budget, less tax collected. We could achieve these purposes in other ways. For example, increasing the tax on luxurious vehicles. We have done that. We can fine-tune that system. Increasing taxes on expensive property. So we have those tools. Now, going back to the second part of those fees and charges, which are not taxes, am I aware of this? Certainly, yes. It's not the tax system. These are tariffs and fees which are set either at the level of municipalities, we have thousands of them, or the heads of the regions. It's difficult to keep track of all of this, and it's a problem, but we have a solution, and I'll tell you what it is. Certainly the pressure has been growing. Certainly you need to have a big picture. The government has been instructed and is supposed to set up a registry of all those non-tax fees by June next year, so that we have a clear picture of what's happening in the country, in the regions, and at the level of municipalities in terms of the load, so that we can fine-tune it in a better way. As for the federal level, we froze the growth in tariffs. So, like energy bills certainly will have an impact on utility bills, but the key tool to curb the growth in tariffs is to decrease inflation. And at the very beginning, I already said, previously we had 12.7, and this year it will be a record low in the history of modern Russia. And if we continue to curb inflation and keep it down to, say, 4%, then we'll certainly stabilize the situation with tariffs. Let's move on to some other areas. Those who sit higher can see further on. Like the Chinese say, and that's true.
Good afternoon, Mr. Putin. I'm from the website. I have a question that our people are very concerned with. The M53 goes through Kemerovo, and we have a lot of problems and traffic jams because of that. And it's the only city in the Urals that doesn't have a ring road. So our government wants to initiate maybe a fundraiser to build this road. Could we solve this problem on a federal level? And then a question about coal mining. So now we believe that coal affects the environment, and we need to stop using it. So what's your take on the future of the Kuznetsk Basin and coal mining?
As for the development of infrastructure, it's a comprehensive issue. Certainly, it's all about building infrastructure, and at the same time, it has to be sustainable. It has to have no impact on the environment. We always support projects of this kind. If you have any sponsor, any investor, certainly will try to support that, both at the regional and federal level. We'll look at the proposal that has been coming out of the region, and will certainly implement this project if we can. Certainly for your region, we know that there's been a lot of impact, a lot of pressure on the environment. Now, as for such raw material as coal, Everyone has been saying that we need to switch to alternative energy sources, and Russia is working on that, including on hydrogen and wind and solar energy too. We are into it. Just recently, I went to a Rus nano plant. They have been implementing high-tech technology. But at the same time, the European Commission decreased subsidies to those industries. Why? Because it's extremely expensive. Today, we need to modernize and improve those technologies, but it comes at a cost. And certainly, they lose out to traditional types of fuel. So for miners and for other workers, I'd like to say that the world uses much more coal than oil and gas. I think even more than oil and gas combined. So coal remains an integral part of the world energy system, and considerable part. As you rightly said, we need to improve the technology to decrease the impact on the environment. I know that your region is moving in that direction. Many of the enterprises are switching to new high-tech processing technology so that they could create that kind of a powder, coal powder that is used. So I'm sure that if we move in that area, then your region and miners from other regions will have a promising, bright future. And they will be in demand. They will have a lot of workload in a positive way, and that will help to drive the Russian economy, the metal sector. The metal sector, as you can see, is going through its downs. But I'm sure it will have a bright future.
Да, вот давайте РИА Новости уж про нефть. Давайте.
Following up on that question, Elena Glushakova, RIA Novosti, I'd like to ask about oil. So what's going to be the dynamics of the oil prices? Right now, it's $45, $50 per barrel. Is that enough for the Russian economy? Is the Russian budget ready to, when we decrease the oil production as we agreed with OPEC?
Well, as far as I know, Brent crude is not $45, it's $55 a barrel. I looked it up this morning. But our budget was based on a conservative forecast of $40 a barrel. So if we return to the first few questions we had on our agenda today, as bureaucrats say, we can say that the results we have achieved were achieved because the real situation turned out to be more complex than we expected, because our 2016 budget was based on the assessment of $50 a barrel, and the actual price was $40 a barrel, and still we saw positive changes with GDP and the inflation rate. We kept it in control. So actually this factor played an important role in what happened with the economy. The situation was worse than average internationally, but the results are better, which means that our economy adjusted for the situation. Now, you asked about prices. Nobody knows what the price of oil is going to be like. It's a complicated issue, and there are many different dynamics here, and it's impossible to predict almost anything. Well, the Energy Ministry gave its forecast. We believe that oil surplus will be off the market by the end of 2017 and prices will stabilize. We expect oil to stabilize at the current level. Now, you asked how our economy will respond to oil cuts. Well, we considered the situation before we took this step. Our production levels were quite high, and the commitment that we made was 300,000 barrels over the period from January to June, and this will not have a major effect on our overall production. This is totally acceptable for Russia. But we expect that prices will go up as a result. And actually, we already see this happening. And if the situation stays this way, the effect for the country, for the budget, for our companies, will be like this. If the price goes up by $10, the budget will receive an additional 1.75 trillion ruble in revenue, and oil companies will get additional revenue of $750 billion. So, as a result, we will all win. We will all benefit. I think this is the first time OPEC has made a decision like that in 8 years. And of course, the fact that we agreed to work with OPEC helped. And we will continue working with OPEC. Of course, we will fulfill our obligations, our commitments, but we are not members of this cartel. But we just stay in contact with OPEC, and we will honor our commitments, but at the same time, we are free to act as we see fit, but we will only take action after we achieve certain results, and we have been achieving positive results so far, and we think this kind of cooperation is helpful to OPEC members and OPEC non-members. Perhaps maybe go over there. Central sector.
Давайте, может быть, вот Уфа я вижу.
Уфа, maybe.
Дайте вот под центральной камерой, да. Я попрошу вас высоко не поднимать, когда вопросы не задают, потому что вы мешаете операторам.
Please don't interfere with the cameraman's work.
Здравствуйте, Владимир Владимирович.
Good afternoon, Mr. Putin.
Город Уфа, Сагадатов Марат, главный редактор.
Ufa newspaper, editor-in-chief, Sagadatov Marat. So first of all, I'd like to thank you on behalf of our readers for what you are doing to strengthen our national defense and our national sovereignty. We listen to what you say very carefully. And when you say that if someone wants to live under semi-occupation, we are not going to. And we agree totally. We think there are some problems, domestic problems in our country, that we could probably characterize in the following manner. Recently, mass media uses a phrase that has such adjectives as cold, hybrid, informational, but the second word is war. So our people, having a good genetic memory, remembers our history. We went through some wars that we came out, and we came out as winners. But So the first thing we remember is the Second World War. Making parallels to the current situation, I'd like to ask you a question. So now our economy, our industries, and our governmental bodies act in accordance with the decisions made by international organizations, and then they ask for consulting from international companies. So we learned about the foreign agents and foreign influence, but the issue with consulting remains. So our readers have been wondering, shouldn't we be doing import substitution here as well, and decide on our own what to do and which way to go? This is not only about economy, this has to do with ideology as well. And there are a lot of questions raised here. So the influx of imports of various kinds resulted in a lot of problems that we've mentioned today. And it also affected our traditional values. So we think that we need import substitution in this area too. So recently, these questions have been becoming more and more urgent. So what are the measures being taken?
You're talking about economic sovereignty, and this is extremely important. You're from Ufa, right? Well, we all know what people in Bashkortostan think. Traditionally, Bashkortostan has always been this way from old times. I can remind everybody that during the 1812 war, Bashkiria provided horses for all our, they provided cavalry. All of their male population joined the army, and similar thing happened during the Second World War. As far as economic sovereignty is concerned, this is not just about import substitution. Our financial system should be self-sufficient as well. Plastic cards, credit cards, there are many things that we take as a given, and we thought that they were separate from geopolitics, but it turned out that this was not true. When they needed to use political pressure, they started using economic factors to put pressure on us. Now, you mentioned consultancies, rating agencies. This is also very important. Of course, we should consider that as well, and this is not a simple issue, but we definitely need our own national rating agency. We should develop consulting as well, and we are actually doing that already. But it is important to make sure that these companies are transparent and respected by the business community. Otherwise, there will be no sense. It makes no sense to have such companies. If we get rid of those foreign companies that are respected in our country and internationally, our businesses will suffer because what their assessments provided by Russian companies, Russian rating agencies, nobody is going to respect their opinion if they can't prove their competitiveness. And we've been there before, and we'll see investment, we'll see fall in investment, but we will certainly work on that. Let's go to Poland now. I guess you are going to ask about the difficulties and the past. I mean,
Good afternoon. I'm from Poland, and 2 years ago in this very room I asked you about the plane crash, and you said you would talk to the investigative committee. So what did they say? We know that the investigation continues, but it's been 7 years, and probably all the tests and expertise has been conducted, so it's only the political decision that's left to make, but that's only up to you. And recently, some people say that Poland has been distancing itself from the EU, and the same has been said about other countries. So if Europe is weaker, is this beneficial for Russia? Is Russia going to use this in its own interests?
Let's start with your first question first. Yes, investigation is underway, and they really need this debris as long as the investigation continues. Now, the second question, let's stop speculations about this. This was a terrible tragedy, and I read through the transcript of the conversation between the pilot, and I think this was one of the president's guards. He went into the cockpit. I personally read through the transcript, and this man who went into the cockpit, I don't remember the name of this person. There was a specific name, and they said, "We want to land," and the pilot said, "I can't land here, it's impossible, I can't land here." And then this person, this presidential aide, said, "I can't report, do whatever you have to do, but we have to land right now, right here." So there is no need to speculate any further. It's a terrible tragedy. We did everything necessary to make sure this incident is properly investigated. I wish you wouldn't use this to create pressure, to create frictions between our two countries. It's crystal clear, and if there are certain matters that are not fully clear, let investigators look into this matter. Now, you also asked about weaker Europe and what we think about it. Of course, we want to have a reliable, strong, and, what is equally important, independent partner in Europe. But when we build our relationship with Europe, if they tell us we need to go to a third country, then why talk to Europe at all? Recently, a European politician said that all European nations are small nations, it's just not all of them have realized that. Actually, I don't agree with this idea, because you have great nations in Europe. I don't want to mention anybody, lest I offend anybody, and we treat them as such. Whatever Europe does inside itself, how they build their relationships with each other, it's none of our business. But you know better than myself that they have sovereign nations with a small superstructure, or they have a quasi-federative state. There are two concepts for Europe. And like I said elsewhere, the number of decisions that are mandatory for all countries, they have more decisions made in Brussels than what the Supreme Council in the Soviet Union did. So it's a high level of federalization. I don't know whether it's good or bad for Europe. It's not up to us to decide that. It's up to you. Yes, there are differences about migrants, the migrant crisis, other things. Again, it's up to Europeans themselves to decide about that. There are certain countries in Europe who object to the current migrant policy, and they want to be involved in this decision-making process more. They don't want to be imposed should other European capitals. But whatever the situation is like within Europe, we are always interested in developing our relationship with Europe, and we will always pursue that. Of course, we want Europe to speak with one voice. We want to have a partner we can talk to. This is what matters to us. But if we don't have such a partner, we will just talk bilaterally to each of the European nations separately. And actually, this is what is happening now. We take up some of the issues with the European Commission, and then we take up some other issues on the national level with the European countries individually. Basically, we are happy with this kind of arrangement, and it's up to Europeans to decide what they do internally.
Простите, но вам никто слова не давал. Давайте вот сюда, пожалуйста, мир.
So it's like a dictatorship, huh?
Good afternoon.
Так как мы канал всех стран СНГ, то для нас очень актуальна
So
тема
we are a
Евразийского
CIS
экономического
channel,
союза.
and
Здесь наметился один
the
парадокс.
topic we are
Для одних стран
interested in
участниц это выгодно,
is
для других
the
невыгодно. Ну, например, вот Армения
EU.
сумела
For some
нарастить
countries
экспорт
it's
сельскохозяйственной продукции,
useful, and for
а
some
в
it's not.
Кыргызстане
Like
ситуация ровно противоположная. Там
Armenia
большинство фермеров
managed to benefit
банкроты.
from it,
Как вы прокомментируете
but
данный
in
феномен?
Kyrgyzia
И
it's the
еще
opposite.
один
Most
к вам вопрос,
farmers
у нас
went
дополнительный.
bankrupt.
Возвращаемся уже в Россию.
And
Вот
one more
вы
question,
наверняка
but this one is
помните
about Russia.
ситуацию с хабаровскими живодерками, которая произошла
So you
осенью,
remember
шокировала всю страну.
that
И
there
вот
were girls who
у
tortured
нас в России
animals in
уполномоченный
Khabarovsk.
по правам человека, уполномоченный по правам
So
ребенка,
we
уполномоченный
have
по защите прав бизнесменов. Может быть,
human
действительно стоит подумать о
rights
создании должности уполномоченного по правам
ombudsman and
животных и
other
как-то
people. So
определиться
maybe we
с
should have
законодательной
a
базой. Спасибо
animal
большое.
rights ombudsman and create a legal framework for that.
По правам животных это вы, конечно, так.
Well, as far as animal rights are concerned, it sounds nice, of course, but dog owners, pet owners, people have rights. Humanitarian issues, humane treatment of animals, this is a separate issue. Of course, we need that as well, but that's a separate matter. And there are proposals to introduce tougher punishment, tougher regulations, and I would support that actually. But of course, there should be some regulation. Of course, we shouldn't go to extremes. It has to be reasonable. And now to the first part of your question. I think all the members of the EAU benefit from what we do as far as integration is concerned. Actually, with Kyrgyzstan as well, they have their difficulties, yes, specifically because of certain issues they have with Kazakhstan and Russia on phytosanitary regulations. That's the problem there. But overall, sales from Kyrgyzstan to the EAU markets have increased, just like with some other countries. I won't mention specific figures right now, but there was a huge increase. For example, Belarus. Their exports to Russia have increased dramatically. So, this is a very useful and beneficial process for all the members of the EAU. With agriculture, yes, there are certain problems because we need to comply with phytosanitary regulations, and there are certain unresolved issues with that in Kyrgyzstan. We provide necessary assistance to our friends in Kyrgyzstan to help them set up a modern phytosanitary control system. And we expect that our partners in Kazakhstan will also help Kyrgyzstan with that, including financial and administrative and professional assistance, so that Kyrgyzstan has such a phytosanitary control system as well. So We don't have any imports coming from Kyrgyzstan that would be hazardous or dangerous in any way to our people. And there are ways to do that, and this can be actually taken care of quite quickly.
The RT channel, accused of all mortal sin in the West. So, RT, Russia Today.
Спасибо большое. Владимир Владимирович, здравствуйте.
Thank you.
Мне бы хотелось
Good afternoon,
в целом
Mr.
поговорить о
Putin.
демократии в контексте
I'd like to talk about
прошедших выборов в
democracy
Америке.
on the whole,
Американские политики, они,
in the context
пожалуй,
of the
больше
presidential
всех в мире
election
любят
in
говорить
the
о
US.
демократии. Демократия
American
делает американский
politicians
народ
love to talk
исключительным.
about
И,
politics. That's
иногда
what
они говорят,
makes
что
the US
демократии не
exceptional.
хватает в других странах. В некоторых
Sometimes
случаях,
they
когда им
say
приходится
that
делиться демократией.
other
Вот,
countries are not
после этих
democratic
выборов,
enough, so
те
they
самые
share and
люди,
spread their
которые гордо
democracy.
несли это знамя со
So
словосочетанием
these very
«американская демократия»,
same people who are so proud of American democracy, common American people started saying that they were betrayed in the aftermath of the presidential elections. So what's wrong with democracy? Is democracy a good thing? And another question that I'm concerned about personally. So recently, Alexander Sevastidi was convicted for 7 years for high treason. So, do you think this is adequate punishment for the text she sent about the military train going to Abkhazia?
As far as this court decision is concerned, our courts are independent in Russia, just like in any other country. But I do believe that this verdict was quite tough. I'm not sure of the details. Was it just the text that she sent? I mean, she wrote what she saw, and everybody saw that, so this means this was not that big of a secret. I'm not quite sure. I don't know all the details. I'll look into this matter. I'll look at the accusations against her, the charges brought against her in court. That's number one. Number two, your question about democracy. Yes, there is an issue, and we have been talking about this for quite a long time, and our U.S. partners have been ignoring this matter. First of all, the problem is that the electoral system in the U.S. is archaic. They don't have direct elections. They have two steps. First, there are electors, their electoral college, and then they elect the president. And certain states, they even have preferences. It's not clear why they have that. It's up to U.S. lawmakers to say why they have this. I don't know, maybe because they provided these preferences to certain states, but it's up to American people to sort this out. It's not up to us. The ruling, as of today, I think it's until January 20th, right? The ruling party, called the Democratic Party, they clearly have forgotten the essence of this name, what this means to be democratic, and they have been using administrative clout without shame. And like encouraging people to disobey voter decisions, electors to vote faithlessly. But like I said earlier, I believe that it's a great country, and they will make necessary decisions, learn the lessons, and the next electoral cycle will be better. Let's go over there now. Let's go. For example, there is a question about chess. Let's talk about chess. I think we need to change the subject. Let's talk about chess now.
Thank you for this chance to ask a question. I'm from Kunguru, Iskra newspaper. So all of Russia was cheering for Mr. Karyakin when he was going through the matches with the current world champion. So the support was promised not only during the big international events, but even on regional level. So there should be a tournament established, and in my native Kungur, we don't see any support for chess. We have a very good chess player, Alexander Ledov, but when he suggests that we should have a chess club, he gets the reply that there are some other priorities like drawing or whatever. So the question is, how will we develop chess in our country in the near future? And will we maybe have support for chess clubs and such?
First and foremost, I don't think I should interfere with decisions made by local authorities, like the school curriculum, things they should do, things they should add. It's a sensitive issue whether they really need chess as part of the mandatory curriculum or even as an addition. It's up to local authorities or maybe even a specific school to decide that. But we certainly should be proud of our history in chess. We know that we have had like people like Alokhin, other people, top chess players, and the players we have today. We are proud of our chess players. And you know, we have this talented kids school in Sochi, and we have a chess section there. That's not enough, of course. We need to develop chess throughout Russia. And I really expect that in your region, you're from Perm, right? Yes. I really hope that people will pay attention to chess in Perm as well. They will support the chess player you just mentioned and everybody who loves chess. And as for Sergei Karyakin, he really played well, but it's just that Magnus Carlsen is the top player of our time. Our chess player was good as well. He performed very well. He is a real fighter, and I really believe that he will win sooner or later.
What's your question about? First row, please. Thank you, Nikolai Dolgachev, Kaliningrad. So, from Kaliningrad to Crimea and back. So, one of my colleagues here asked about this bridge and called it the Kerch Strait Bridge. But there is no official name. Some people call it the Crimean Bridge, the Kerch Bridge, the Russian Bridge. So the question is, which do you prefer? Which would you suggest? And again, back to Kaliningrad. So the bridge is going to be completed very soon. What's the next big project here?
As for the name, it's up to the people. Perhaps you could do it in the form of an opinion poll or a referendum. The most important thing is to build it. Naming is of a secondary nature. Well, if you call it the Kerch Bridge, okay, let it be. Kaliningrad has its own issues that need to be solved in a priority way, and that's the energy independence. It has to be self-sufficient in terms of energy supplies. It's very important. And certainly that has to do with our relations with the EU. The European Union has taken a decision that the Baltic states have to join their energy alliance, and that causes problems for us. In terms of energy supplies to Kaliningrad, it requires additional resources to build a new supply line. I'm not sure why they're doing it. Well, previously we didn't have any issues in terms of energy supplies to the Baltic states. Everything has been running smoothly. Our European partners always tell us that we need to come together, we need to move closer and find common ground, while exactly the opposite is happening here. They've disrupted our relationship in such a sensitive area as energy. Certainly, we will resolve this issue. We'll ensure energy independence. As you might have heard, we plan to supply LNG, liquefied natural gas. We plan to build a power plant. We might use small-scale nuclear plants that are produced in Russia. This is one of the key areas for the development of Kaliningrad. So we need to have some kind of energy resources to drive the economy. Road construction, infrastructure, certainly there are a lot of issues. I just mentioned two. There are others pending. The most important thing that we need to provide is the use of the opportunities of Kaliningrad, which is really close to our European partners. It needs to be economically aligned into the economy in terms of the preferences that the region has. Well, you had a free trade zone and you had those preferences, but instead of those preferences you now have subsidies from the federal government. So it needs to be all aligned so that you are sustainable without any disruption to the manufacturing sector, to the infrastructure. In terms of Crimea, one of the problems is energy supplies. And I'd like to inform you that Chernomorneftegaz, a oil company, has finalized its project. The oil pipelines of Crimea are now fully connected with the oil network, with the pipeline network of Russia. In the next 2 or 3 days, we will announce that. Russian oil and gas will be supplied to Crimea. It means that today, right now, we have winter, and Crimea consumes 1,300 megawatts. 800 used to be supplied by Ukraine. Its proprietary generation capacities generate about 1,000 or 1,100 megawatts. But in the next 2 or 3 days, we will start supplying Russian natural gas, and we will start the construction of 2 power plants in Crimea with a capacity of 470 megawatts. So the total generating capacity will be around 2,000 megawatts. So, as you can see, the peak consumption is 1,000 megawatts, so there will be around 800 megawatts extra capacity for the future. That will be needed for the development of the economy, for the agricultural sector, for manufacturing, for tourism and recreation, construction of new hotels. So this is a landmark event for Crimea. I hope
Сегодня я вижу.
Please.
Слева. Ага, да, спасибо.
Здравствуйте, Владимир Владимирович. Меня
Good afternoon, Mr. Putin. Almina Arpetyan,
Северокавказский федеральный округ, Пятигорск. Вопрос следующий. Сейчас все мировое сообщество борется с террором.
The international community is fighting terrorism, and first and foremost with the organization that calls itself the Islamic State.
Их самоназвание также называют их
Unfortunately,
в средствах массовой информации.
People in Russia call them the same way, including in mass media, but we know that terrorism has nothing to do with Islam or state. Don't you think it would be logical and right to forbid the mass media to use Islamic State as a name?
what kind of media do you work at?
Кавказ сегодня.
Do you need to ban anything? I think it's wrong to ban anything. Certainly, Islam should never be put together with the terror. Well, you have a person from the Yamal region. Let's have a question from Russia's north.
Good afternoon. Lilia Gorokhova, Sever Press. You visited our region a number of times. You opened some projects. Let's be honest, Yamal will remain one of the drivers of the Russian economy. We have a lot of projects, but we don't have enough roads. There is a project with all the agreements signed with the Russian railroads, etc. So you're the person to ask, when is the construction going to start? And another question. Right now, the taxes of the donor regions get redistributed to neighboring regions that are having a hard time. Should this be permanent or temporary?
You just said that we need to implement that project. Will you be able to do it on your own? No. You realize that. So you need support too. So the practice by the finance ministry, which is called leveling out the income of different regions, is the appropriate one. There might be regions that get extra income thanks to raw mineral resources. We need to also keep in mind that all of this belongs to the people, all of the Russian people. And you can only ensure their rights through that leveling out practice, evening out the incomes of regional budgets. And so that redistribution is necessary to kickstart economic growth. You're absolutely right that we should not have any free riders in Russia. We need to stimulate regions to increase their tax base. I don't want to go into detail. There are a lot of ways how to do it, but it has to be done. And we've been trying to do that, and we'll continue to do that. As for the specific project that you referred to, when, well, once it's deemed economically viable and feasible, if they realize that it's going to generate revenue, we'll launch that project. It's a project that the Russian economy really needs. It will help to diversify our network. It will provide a new capacity for rail transportation and a connection to the port of Yamal. The port is up and running, and we were going to set up one of the biggest enterprises in Russia. So the Yamal LNG perhaps is one of the biggest investment projects in the world at this moment. Novatek and its partners, both European and Chinese, and investors from Japan and other countries, have been able to move forward on schedule. And it's really surprising, given the harsh climate and conditions that they're working in, despite the problems that someone's trying to create. I don't know why someone's trying to create those problems. I hope that common sense will prevail. But I can see, even from today, that the project will be implemented. So, as we implement those projects, certainly infrastructure will be needed, and I'm sure we'll come to that. And the sooner the better. The Far East, someone from the East.
Good afternoon, Mr. Putin. Kurdistan 24 channel. I have a question. As you know, Kurds played a key role in fighting international terrorism, and Russia is playing a very major role in the Middle East now. So, what's Russia's stance on the fact that the Iraqi Kurds have taken some steps to independence?
Russia has always had a special and very good relationship with Kurds. Kurds have their own very difficult path. We know what's happening in the Middle East. I can only reaffirm that the Peshmerga, the Kurd units, have been really courageous in fighting international terrorism. They've been really efficient in the battles. As for sovereignty and independence of certain parts, we proceed from the premise that we need to act in accordance with international law. Ultimately, the rights of the Kurds, the legitimate rights, will be ensured. But what will be the form, how will it be done, it depends on Iraq and on the Kurds themselves. We have been in contact, we will be in contact with Baghdad and with Kurds, but we will not interfere into the domestic affairs of Iraq.
Владимир Ильич, вы знаете, что есть такое вот интернет-издание, очень Лента.ру, вот я видел.
You know, let's go with Lenta.ru, an online publication. Tatiana Melikan, Lenta.ru, thank you for this opportunity. So, we talked about patriotism today a little. This word has been used a lot this year. And so, the question is the state maybe overzealous in terms of patriotism? There was a photo exhibit closed in Moscow, and then there was the Jesus Christ Superstar opera closed in Omsk. It's hard when hooliganism can be called patriotism. So, should we distinguish between our hooligans and call them patriots, or what? And as for the Khabarovsk and animal torture, well, you talked about the rights of the pet owners, but there are some animals which don't have owners. So what are we to do then? How is the process going to be organized? There should be shelters, and they should be taken from the streets. And please, the girls should have a harsher punishment for their actions.
Well, that was the main takeaway of my statement. As I said, we need to apply the most humane principles. Certainly, we need to provide some kind of civilized system. We have heard of instances when wild animals attacked children. Certainly, regional authorities cannot just turn a blind eye to it. There are a host of issues, so we need to resolve them. As for patriotism, definitely the Russian government will support patriotism. We have no other unifying force. Should we distinguish between good and bad hooligans? No, hooligans are hooligans. You need to distinguish between common sense-based actions from the scum that you have around it. We shouldn't only rely on the phobias that we have in the media space. We remember that incident with the exhibition. Perhaps no one would pay attention to it had it not been attacked. But what about that photographer? Well, he was, actually charged in the US, but he thought he could do it in Russia, what is unacceptable in the US. The response was not that civilized, and perhaps that's bad, but certainly you have different government agencies that need to take decisions, and the community needs to have some kind of checks and balances. We talked about that at the recent council. The council on, how is it called? Thank you, Mr. Peskov. It was a council on culture. And there have been other questions on the ban on Jesus Christ Superstar opera. Well, that was in Omsk, right? So actually, the year before it took place. But right now, when they started selling tickets, they only sold 46 tickets. 46 tickets only. And that's why the organizers of that opera, of that concert, decided not to go ahead with it. It's impossible to ban something in modern world. We will not go down that road. Certainly, it's a very delicate area. And we need a constant dialogue with the community. And definitely, we need this, and I agree with you, 100%.
Education, maybe.
Микрофон можно?
Ольга Паутова, Первый канал. Владимир Владимирович,
Olga
в
Paltova,
нашей
Channel
стране
1.
сейчас работает
Mr.
всего 3
Putin,
детских хосписа. Первый московский
there are only
хоспис строится уже
3
несколько лет.
hospices in
Но
our
благодаря
countries,
этому
and
месту
the
смертельно больные дети не будут лежать в
Moscow
реанимации один
hospice
на
has
один
been
с болезнью.
operational for a few
Они не будут
years,
мучиться от боли
and
дома.
thanks to
Они
it,
смогут быть там,
the children
где от этой боли их
have
избавят, где
get
рядом всегда
care
будет мама, где они
when
смогут
their
играть,
mothers
где они
are
смогут
always
гулять, где они
with
смогут
them
не
when they
доживать,
can
а
play
жить.
and
Но стройка
live.
идет со скрипом. Мы часто
But
показываем на нашем канале ее. Она
the
идет только на деньги
construction
благотворителей.
is
Их
very
постоянно не
slow,
хватает, они
and
заканчиваются, но
it's
семьи с
only
паллиативными
due to
детьми нет времени
charity
ждать.
funds that
Может
it's
быть, государству уже пора вмешаться
proceeding,
как-то в это и
and
помочь
some
довести
children
эту
don't
стройку
have
до
enough
конца, ведь
time
речь
to
идет о
wait
детях.
while it's completed. So maybe the government should help, considering it's about children.
Probably, but it actually was, the project was initiated by charities. Certainly, it's a sensitive question. We always support a project like this kind. Just recently, I granted an award to a priest who's devoted all his life to it. Certainly, the government is doing a lot in this area, but if a charity starts a project, it needs to know that it will be able to finish this. And that has to be done in any area. I mean, if you say you can do it, then you have to do it, as the Russian saying goes. So you can't really start something and then ask for help. But by and large, certainly, we need to focus more on it, and I hope that after our conversation, you represent Channel 1. I hope that the municipal authorities will pay more attention to it, just like in other Russian regions.
Чуть-чуть вот здесь у нас не охвачено. Вот, может быть, образование? Образование?
Ну, пожалуйста. Вот там остановите ювенальную юстицию. Что вы имеете?
Stop juvenile justice. What is meant by that?
Добрый день, Рия Иван.
Good afternoon,
Уважаемые коллеги, уважаемый Владимир Владимирович. 9 февраля
dear colleagues, Mr. Putin. On February 9th, 2013, you visited a parent meeting and made a statement that without a public discussion, we will not have juvenile will not be designed after the Western standards. But I can tell you that our system is about the same as it is in Scandinavia. Then you asked to decriminalize Article 116, and your decision was implemented in a very strange way. So now the standard is that there are so-called close individuals to whom different standards are applied. So, if a father slaps his child, he can get a sentence of 2 years, but if a neighbor does it, he might just get a fine. So we started a petition. We have 213,000 signatures to stop the child protection services system of the Western standards. So we have letters, and every one of those letters contains the request to meet with you. Even now I have parents behind my back.
Well, it's best not to slap children and not to refer to some kind of traditions. And certainly it's bad for parents and for neighbors. Certainly you have this practice, but, you know, children depend completely on parents. Certainly there are a lot of other ways to educate your child without slapping him. But, well, that could ruin the family. Certainly, I'm just like you, I'm against those excesses of child protection practices. And I thought that my instruction was completed, and just got a report that it was indeed done. Well, let's revisit the issue. Certainly, such interference into the family affairs is unacceptable. Let's go back to this issue once again.
Alexander
Gamov from Komsomolskaya Pravda.
Александр Гамов, радио «Комсомольская правда», сайт
Alexander Gamov,
и, собственно, газета
Комсомольская правда.
У меня вопрос довольно острый, поэтому я надеюсь на очень откровенный, как всегда, ответ.
So,
вы, Владимир Владимирович, расставляете на постах глав регионов людей из своего ближайшего окружения.
Mr. Putin, you appoint people from your close circle to the positions of governors. So I met with Alexei Dumin, with Mr. Mironov. Dumin is the governor of Tula, and Mironov is the government of Yaroslavl province. He's the acting governor. So I see this as the continuation of this tradition started a few years ago when you appointed Mr. Yunukurov as head of Ingushetia. I also met with the youngest acting governor of Kaliningrad province, Mr. Alekhanov. He's only 30. So I'm thinking, is this on purpose? Is this practice, are you going to carry on with this practice of appointing governors this way? What's the reason? Do you not trust the local governors? And in the mass media, in our newspaper in particular, we discuss this question that maybe Mr. Putin is testing these people, and if so, why? What's the purpose? Do you have some long-term plans, and if so, what are they?
Well, the only goal is the welfare of Russia, and you have to boost the defense, the economy, and we need the right kind of people. How many regions do we have? 85. How many did you mention? Just 3. Is it part of any trend? Have they played any key role among the governors? So, you asked, do we trust the local politicians? Yes. In the vast majority of Russian regions, you have governors who come from those regions, in the absolute majority of regions. Certainly there are cases when you need to find someone new, someone from the outside, and this is supported by the people of that particular region. People say that they need some kind of a reshuffle, a new elite. You just mentioned 3 people, but what about Mr. Gaplikov? There have been many more. Mr. Gaplikov was sent to the Republic of Komi. What about the Kirov region? Yes, these are young people, efficient managers. So they have a lot of energy and they have a lot of promise. And they have a good reputation in terms of management. So we look at the business qualities, the personal qualities, and that makes us think that they would be able to perform their duties in an efficient way, and I rely on them to do that. As for their future, everything will depend on them, on their performance, on the way the people will assess them. Mr. Dermin worked for 6 months, and then about 85% of the population of the Tula region voted for him. But that's not enough, and that applies to other appointees, starting from the Sevastopol to the Kirov region or to the Yaroslav region. I just recently talked to the first woman in space, Ms. Tereshkova, and she thanked me for finding such a good person, such a good governor for the Yaroslav region. Although this is the first sign that the new governor is trying to assimilate, trying to integrate and settle down. I wish all of them success and to serve in the interest of the people who live in those regions. Now, someone from Berlin.
Sebastian Raube, Korrespondent RT Deutsch. Wenn Sie einverstanden sind, würde ich gerne auf Deutsch fragen. Vielen Dank, dass ich eine Frage stellen kann, Herr Präsident. Was ist Ihre Vision für das Jahr 2017 für die Beziehung zu dem Westen, wenn wir daran denken, dass es einen Neustart zwischen den Beziehungen der USA und Russland gibt? Und jetzt vor dem Hintergrund des Terroranschlags in Berlin, ist es Zeit, jetzt zusammenzurücken? Und eine zweite Frage. Gestern starb Jewgeni Djugaschwili, der Enkel Josef Stalins, der stets für seine Rehabilitierung gekämpft hat. In einem Interview sagte uns der berühmte Regisseur Kirill Serebrennikov, dass er eine Rehabilitierung sehr fürchtet. Wie sehen Sie das? Können Stalins Verbrechen relativiert werden durch seine Erfolge?
Ist das alles? Значит, что касается
Okay. As regards our relationship with Europe, I've already covered that when I answered a question from your colleague from Poland. We did not do it. It's not because of us that the relationship between Russia and Europe, Russia and Germany went sour. We did not impose any sanctions on Europe. We just responded to restrictions imposed on the Russian economy. We would be happy to lift all the sanctions, even though our agricultural companies ask us not to do it. But if our European partners lift their anti-Russian sanctions, we will respond in kind. So let's take an objective look at what happened, how we got here. First, our US friends and our European friends were guarantors on the agreement between President Yanukovych and the opposition. Then, the very next day, they violated everything. They seized power, and instead of condemning the anti-constitutional coup and asking them to respect the treaty that was co-signed by the foreign ministers of 3 European countries, they supported this anti-constitutional coup. As a result, people living in Crimea wanted to go back to Russia, and this caused Ukraine to lose Crimea, and this caused this bloody conflict in Donbass. And what was all this based on? It's amazing, but this entire tragedy was based on the fact that they could not coordinate their positions on Ukraine signing an association treaty with the EU. These are purely economic issues. How can you take such an issue and escalate it into this kind of conflict? Was it us who did it? No. We have been talking to you for years, asking to coordinate the parameters of this agreement. And what President Yanukovych said eventually, I want to join the EU within this association agreement, but I just need to talk to Russia. I just need to coordinate some of the parameters. We need the Russian market. I just want to take some time to think about it. But our European partners said no, and the rest is history. How can you do such a thing? So we don't think it's our fault. We did not do it. And what happened then? What is still going on? After this coup, under the pretext of joining this association agreement, immediately they postponed this association agreement right away. They did exactly what Yanukovych suggested they do. And they procrastinated for over a year or more, and then eventually they said that they made a decision to ratify this agreement, and basically they put it on the back burner again. And now, after the referendum in the Netherlands, Europe doesn't want to ratify this agreement. I don't even know what to say about this situation. Now, this matter of visa-free travel for Ukrainians, again, it's questionable. And even if they do it, this will only bring Ukrainian labor migrants to Europe, and they will be at a disadvantage there. The best way to handle the situation would be to do it together, in a calm way, without agitation, work constructively together. This is the kind of relationship we would like to have with Europe. We would like to work together to address the issues we have facing us today, and this includes fighting terror. Of course, our hearts go out to the victims and their families in Berlin. And like I said many times, actually, when I spoke at the UN, when we marked the 70th anniversary of this organization, I said we should all work together. We should have a united front. And how can you do that if you have sanctions and then counter-sanctions? If we roll back our cooperation in so many areas. For example, our UK colleagues have suspended their contacts with the FSB. How can we work effectively to fight terror? As a result, we suffer attacks, very dangerous attacks. So I really hope we will be able to restore this cooperation in the future.
Можно мы дадим слово Андрею Колесникову из «Коммерсанта»? Он тоже хочет задать вопрос.
Andrei Kolesnikov from Kommersant, please.
Another journalist from the Kremlin pool, huh?
Yeah.
Да уж. Андрей Колесников, газета «Коммерсант».
Andrei Kolesnikov, Kommersant. Mr. Putin,
на вопрос, почему вы обязательно должны в 2018
what
году
would you say if you were asked whether or not you should become president in 2018 again? And the opposite.
It's a provocative question. This guy is a John provocateur.
As always.
Well, you'll get my standard response. When the time comes, I'll take a look at the situation in the country, I'll take a look at the situation in the world, and based on what we have achieved, based on what we will be able to achieve, I will make a decision regarding whether I should run or not in the upcoming presidential election.
Урал Ельцин.
Good afternoon, Mr. Putin. I'm sure you know about the controversial situation around the Yeltsin Center in Yekaterinburg. So, what's your opinion on this, about the discussion started by Mr. Mikhalkov? He criticized the center for justifying the loss of troops and distorting history. So what would you say to the people who are angry this is done on state money?
You know, I had a meeting with Mr. Mikhalkov. I met with Valentin Yumashev. I met with Tatiana Dyachenko. I guess there are certain issues that need to be studied further in more detail, specifically the issues related to the way information is presented regarding Russia's history. And I'm not only talking about the recent history, like the perestroika years up until now. We're talking about history in general here. And they agreed with me that perhaps certain things need to be presented in a more accurate manner. But there's one thing that I don't like. I don't like to escalate these issues. There's nothing wrong with having a discussion. This is normal, this is proper. Some people may like it, some not. Some people are more liberal regarding current events and the things of the past. Other people are more conservative. We've always had these two trends. We had Westerners, and then we had Russophiles. But in the current situation, for example, when we think back to 1917, and next year will mark centenary of the 1917 revolution, what we should seek is reconciliation. We should seek unity and harmony. We should not escalate conflict, strife around this issue. So that's my response to your question. And I see this banner there. Okay. What's your question?
Maxim Rumyancev, Yekaterinburg. My question is about the environment. Rosatom constructs strategic facilities. So there are some organizations that are like ISIS, but their agenda is the environment. Some of the environmental organizations are recognized as foreign agents. So how do you sort through all the communications to the president? So in our province, there is manipulation of public opinion. One of the main and another thing, Serebryanka village was isolated from the world, and they got their pensions in Tagil, which is 70 kilometers away. You promised that the road will be built in 2018, but what are they going to do until then?
On the second part of your question, I will certainly point out this matter to the governor, and I hope he will respond along with the local authorities. This is unacceptable, of course. Things like that happen quite often, unfortunately, in different parts of our country, and it's too bad that local authorities are unable to cope with such situations. Regardless of where they live, people should not be isolated from the rest of the country, and they definitely should have access to basic services. Now, you mentioned environmental organizations and how we can differentiate between people who really care about nature and foreign agents and such. Actually, this is not the matter of foreign agents, even though our rivals sometimes do use environmental organizations in order to slow down growing sectors, say infrastructure projects in Russia or power plants, like in your case, for example. I remember how foreign governments supported certain environmental organizations and asked them to argue against construction of seaports and other infrastructure projects. We even knew how much money has been donated by foreign governments to help those organizations stop us. Of course, we also should care about environment, and with the Nuclear Energy Agency, they definitely should be mindful about that. But this is a major company, and after what happened in Fukushima, IAEA inspectors said that our standards were the safest in the world because we learned all the lessons we had during the Soviet period and what happened abroad, and our technologies are really the safest. But then there is always abuse. I talked to an environmental organization, and he said he came and extorted $30 million. Said, give this money to me, and then you'll be off the hook. So they had a board meeting, and then they decided to pay this money. Better pay this money. Then things like that happen. We are aware of that. And the only way to deal with this situation, of course, you can't just ignore such situations. The only way to deal with this situation is to study this matter in a deep and professional way. You should look at the economic effect and environmental safety. Consider all the factors. Okay. Well, what is this question that you want to ask? Use the mic, please.
Thank you, Mr. Putin. I know I looked a little silly there, but my question is of life and death variety, so sorry. I'm Ekaterina Vinokurova from Znak.com. I always watch your addresses and listen to your statements, and you say very good things, but the very next day things go in the completely opposite way.
Everything, huh? I think you're too radical.
I'll give you some examples.
Okay.
So everyone's nodding when you said in your address that aggressive response shouldn't be made. So my colleague was beaten by Nod. It's a movement. They have very aggressive slogans to cleanse the authorities and everything. And there is a supposedly orthodox organization, but what they preach, it makes people turn away from the church. So this movement, they provoked the believers, and then they went to the police and wrote a complaint on them. So you say that we're sensitive to truth, to justice, and etc. But we see that Mr. Sechin, for example, he can start constructing a house in Barvicha, and he's a civil servant in a not very rich country. So, some years ago, you said that you are in favor of mayors being elected, but that initiative went the other way. But the thing is, people agree with you, but
stop here.
Why do you say one thing, but in real life we see absolutely the opposite? Is this some kind of slow coup or something? Another question. An RBK journalist, Sokolov, he's been detained for years now, and the accusations leveled against him are absurd. So we have no hope for justice. Another case, Ms. Chernovets, that published a video where a boy was tortured, and her post attracted the attention of the law enforcement, but she was the one convicted. We need to do something about our justice system. Please save the people.
Okay. What you said about our judicial system. Actually, recently, we made a number of steps to make our legal practice more humane. This includes criminal law, administrative offenses, and other things. And we have been pursuing this policy intentionally, and we will continue this work. Extreme views, radical actions. We have a large and complex country. There are people who organize provocative exhibitions, and they do this on purpose. They say they want to raise awareness and things like that. Because you shouldn't go to extremes with that as well. You should be reasonable. The same goes for patriots, so-called patriots, and chauvinists. Everybody should be reasonable. You mentioned some specific cases. Actually, I haven't heard about those people. I haven't heard those names. I promise you, I'll look into that. I don't know if all those decisions were fair. Now, the decision to build when companies, government, corporation, executives build something luxurious, ostentatious. I agree with that. People should be more modest. And I really hope that they will hear me. The same goes for the bonuses they receive, their income. You should realize what kind of country we live in, not make people angry. Now, you also mentioned the lawsuit. It's up to the court to decide the amount of compensation. If there is an individual who filed a lawsuit to protect their reputation, it's up to the court to decide whether this publication, this media organization, is really guilty. I think Sechin wanted to get, like several billion rubles from RBC, and then the court said, yes, they are guilty, but I think they were only fined 360,000 rubles, and that's not that much. But, you know, I often talk to artists, people with all sorts of views, and they complain that journalists terrorize them, harass them, approach their children even. So I would like to ask your colleagues, you should also be more careful. in the way you do your work, you should not interfere with their private lives. Celebrities, athletes, people like that. We should all follow certain rules. And we're all cultured people in our country. So there is a question from CCTV.
Здравствуйте, Владимир Владимирович. Я хотела
Good afternoon, Mr. Putin. I'd like to follow up on the Russia 24 question. So now the situation is very difficult. There are migrants and instability in the Middle East. In the light of this, what are the new approaches that great powers like Russia and China can find to resolve all those issues?
Well, we all know that the relationship between Russia and China is very good. We describe it as strategic partnership, but actually it's even bigger than partnership, bigger than strategic partnership. What we have between Russia and China in recent years, economically, China is our biggest, number one trade partner. There was a slight decrease in trade, but that's what's due to objective difficulties, specifically low fuel prices. But we diversify our relations, and the amount of trade in high-tech sectors, in the real sector, in production, has been increasing substantially. We have a major joint project in aircraft manufacturing, space exploration, energy, including nuclear energy. We have some very good projects with infrastructure. We continue and we will continue. There are certain difficulties, of course, but I will not talk about this right now. We have some interesting ideas about switching to our national currencies in bilateral trade, and the IMF is actually going to use the RMB as a reserve currency now, and congratulations to China on that. And our positions on many international issues are very close, and this is certainly a very strong stabilizing factor in international affairs. So we treasure our relationship with China, and we expect to continue developing it further in the future.
Дайте, пожалуйста, вот сюда второй ряд посередине. Микрофон. Сейчас дадут.
Здравствуйте, Владимир Владимирович. Наталья Галимова.
Good afternoon, Mr. Putin. Наталья Галимова, RBC.
Я, наверное, начну с того вопроса, который я думала последним задать, но...
I'll start with the question I was going to ask last, but since my colleague mentioned this, Alexander, a year ago, in this very hall, you said you would look into his fate. So now the case went to court. Well, maybe you've been busy and you didn't have enough time, but please look into it.
I'm sorry I have to interrupt you, but let me stop you there. You know, if this was public, the presidential staff really looked into this matter, and if the case went to court, this means that it's not that simple as you say.
Another question. You talked about mass media being responsible, but there's a different side to this medal. Sechin is suing a lot of mass media outlets, but it always ends the same way. Sechin wins the case. And the courts demand that the articles that he's displeased about would be taken down or destroyed. So don't you think this is a very dangerous precedent?
So are you angry with the Sechin, with the courts, or with the fact that you don't have accurate information? You need to take a closer look. Sechin, like other people who go to court, how do you expect them to protect their reputation? Should they take a billy club and go to your office? They go to court, as civilized people do. Now, about those decisions, I only know about this case that he went to RBC and he sued it for 3 billion rubles, and then the court awarded him 300,000 rubles. So this is an insignificant amount for RBC daily, and I don't think this will seriously affect your economic standing. But the very fact that okay, let me start from a different angle here. The fact that journalists sometimes criticize government officials and businessmen, I think it's a positive.
But what about the decision to take down the articles?
Well, I cannot comment on that. If it was a legal decision, if it was lawful, you have to comply with that.
And another question. It's not a dialogue. Well, it's an important question.
Okay, let's talk about taxes.
So in your address, you asked the government to work on the tax system after 2018. So how do you see this new system? And what will be your stance if the taxes, if they decide to increase the taxes?
Back in 2014, we decided not to increase any tax load on the business community. Despite the different proposals from different ministries and agencies, eventually there's been no tax hike. Instead, we introduced a number of privileges and tax breaks for SMEs. We've been now thinking that perhaps self-employed people will also be eligible for tax breaks, so that they perhaps need some time to settle down. We've also been talking about priority development areas, about special tax regime for agriculture. There are two options: either to cut tax payments in a legal way, and also high-tech business, including small high-tech businesses, perhaps would be eligible for less payments in terms of the payroll tax. In 2018, this period will end. So right now, we need to think about it carefully, together with the business community, with the experts, including RBK, because you are a media outlet that focuses on business. You have very good experts. I sometimes watch your broadcasts. So I hope that together we would be able to draft an action plan for the next 4 years. And once we have a solution, we will provide a sustainable foundation for the business community for the next 4 years.
way back over there, I saw a poster that says Irkutsk alcohol. So this is about the tragedy that's happened. Good afternoon. Every regional newspaper, yes. Over the last week, Irkutsk became top news for a tragic reason. Now, Irkutsk province is leading the fight against illegal circulation of alcohol or substances containing alcohol. There's a number of measures that will be implemented to achieve that, and it's comforting to know that it's not only our problem. There are other regions suffering from the same thing. So one of the suggestions is to increase excise duty. So there is no proper control, and another big problem is the number of drunks. It's not only people at the very bottom, but people with low income. They can't afford to buy alcohol in stores, so they go to illegal traders. So first of all, what's your take on the measures suggested by the authorities, and are there any measures going to be taken against the alcohol addiction of the population in general?
First of all, what happened in Irkutsk is a horrendous tragedy, words fail me, and certainly this is an outrage because the inspections and other agencies that were supposed to prevent it didn't do it. What actually happened, a number of people from a foreign state set up a workshop to produce that bath lotion bottles, and they use methanol. It's not a poison, but some of the people decided to generate extra cash. So he got somewhere that methanol and used it. And that led to the poisoning. As for the government is doing with excise duties, these are proper measures, but it's too little too late. So the business community is now complaining that perfume and other items are going to cost more. Well, we have to admit that still these actions are justified because of these tragedies. So I instructed the government to set up an action plan, and I hope that it will yield results to save the lives and the health of our people. As for the level of alcohol addiction, indeed it's a problem, but it's not worse than in other countries, especially in Nordic European countries. We need a series of measures. We do have a program in place. We cannot simply ban things, although some bans have to be implicated. Do we have any beer bars near the Kremlin? I don't know, but there should be no beer bars near preschool facilities or schools. These decisions have been made. We need to enforce these decisions, and certainly we need to continue to work on this. There needs to be a lot of education. The media need to focus on that, and I would like you to support us in this work. This is extremely important. Demographics depends a lot on this. So overall, it's one of the key areas of our joint work. Love. A question about love? Well, we need to end our press conference. Well, love can turn into hatred if we sit here for too long. Georgia, a question on Georgia. There was a question on the Russian drink, kvass. We'll get back to it. That's the story from last year.
Tamara Gutseridze, Maestro. So, recently, our cultural and other relations were reinstated, but that's where it stopped. One of the reasons are the territorial problems that exist. So, what are our prospects in terms of political dialogue, or is the status quo, or are we stuck with the status quo? So, the possibility of visa-free regime with, between Ukraine and the EU, but what about Georgia, which is going to have the same with Europe? It's going to come faster than a visa-free regime for Georgians in Russia.
Well, I think that a visa regime in Europe is a thing of the past, regardless of whether we refer to Ukraine or Georgia. We need to establish a visa-free regime for all citizens of all countries. As for Russia and Georgia, well, the crisis in our relationship started after a conflict. It might seem trivial, but it's not us who were to blame. It was not Russia who started hostilities in South Ossetia, but eventually we need to start thinking about normalizing our relations, and perhaps we could go back to a visa-free travel for Georgians. We have all the grounds for it. We are receiving certain signals from some Georgian officials. It's very important to establish a normal relationship between law enforcement agencies and security services in terms of fighting terrorism, so that this visa-free regime would not undermine our securities. So we need to have cooperation in fighting terror. So overall, this is possible. So what about kvass? Was it last time or the year before that? No to vodka, yes to kvass.
Vladimir Mamontov, thank you for kvass in particular. We're exporting to China and the US.
The market is boundless.
Without your support, there wouldn't have been any of this, so come to see us anytime. So the question about governors, so-called your people, so our governor wants to create a platform. So if I come to you every time to discuss every vodka brand...
Do you think we could leave that long?
Mr. Putin, we have a lot of things to be proud of, and he wants to create a platform where Kyiv brands could flourish. So it's just
So what do you
1
want
hour
from
by
me?
plane. I'll explain. I know. So what we want is to basically restore VDNH. We want to produce things in Kyiv and then bring them here. So is the president going to support this idea and maybe do that all over Russia?
Well, we have it in Moscow. Just recently, there was some low-scale markets. Well, this place in Moscow, known for its exhibits from different regions, well, it's all been reviving. If you have any ideas in terms of presenting your goods, I think we can do that, and I'm sure that Mr. Sobyanin, the mayor of Moscow, will hear us, and they could talk together with the governor of the region. Certainly, we need to develop markets, we need to move to new markets, revive the old ones.
So I can tell him you support this project. When are you going to come over to our province?
Thank you for the invitation. I'll try to come as soon as possible. You know, maybe the final question, otherwise it's going to be an endless event. Okay, just a couple of questions.
NBC News, Moscow. Давайте нашим еще раз американским коллегам.
Спасибо. Буду коротко, без преамбулы.
Thank you. I'll be concise.
Встретиться с Дональдом Трампом и какие вопросы?
When do you think you will meet with Donald Trump, and what kind of issues you're going to have on your agenda? Strategic issues, I mean.
It's difficult for me to say that at this stage. First of all, the newly elected president needs to have time to build his new team. It's not expedient to have meetings which are not prepared for. Certainly, we need to discuss ways to normalize our relations. During his election campaign, Mr. Trump said that it would be proper to normalize our relations, and he said it can't be worse because, well, it can't be worse. And I agree with him. So together we'll think of how to make it better. So you have a good question. Give you what?
Good afternoon. My name is Vladimir Gusev. I'm from bloknot.ru. Mr. Putin, which of the mistakes you made do you think is the biggest one this year? And what do you think was your biggest mistake as president, this term or any presidential term?
I've been asked questions like that several times. Every person makes mistakes. You can't live your life without mistakes. So I will not repeat what I said previously, but I'll try to certainly do some homework from my homework so that we should have fewer mistakes in the future, so that we all work in an efficient way.
А вот классный журнал детский деловой.
Владимир Владимирович, Алексей
Mr. Putin,
Ходович, главный редактор.
Alexei Khudorovich, editor-in-chief, in your address, you talked about bringing up a moral person, but it's impossible without reading. But children these days spend a lot of time on the internet, they play games, but it's the journals and magazines that create a habit of reading. We talked to the libraries, and they told us that there are cuts, so they can't buy as many magazines and the magazines that they want. So is there going to be any support so that the libraries can have everything they need? And my second question is from Sasha Aksonenko. He's 8, and he asked about robots. What kind of robots are you missing in Kremlin?
We need robots in production, in the industry. We deal with delicate issues, and certainly a lot depends on us, and we need humans in this area. And certainly we can't rely on robots in deciding the future of millions of people. As for libraries, as for children's books, I agree with you. We're trying to revive the library movement, but at a new base. It's important to come, to listen, to look at the books, to watch the pictures in the books. And we can see that modern media oust books, but we also need to provide the right content on modern media that is necessary for the education of the younger generation, so that we can influence their souls, their minds, to shape their worldview, their attitude to life. Libraries need to be turned into multimedia centers, offering both books and online activities. There are other sensitive areas, and we need to focus more on it, not just at the federal, but primarily at the regional and municipal level. If they need additional support, if they need support from us, okay, we'll think of that. But what kind of support, it's up to them. We can't just earmark money. It's not always the most efficient way of support, but we definitely need to do that.
Вот давайте, у нас газета «Ведомости» осталась, не охваченная абсолютно. Дайте центр.
Вот как раз «Ведомости» нас обвиняют, что, Сечин считает, что мы
Ведомости
его не любим, но на самом деле
newspaper.
его любим, и есть за что его похвалить. Сечина.
Everyone says that Ведомости hate Sechin, but that's not true. There are things he can be praised for, but there are some things that raise questions. So about the budget, he managed to adopt it and to cut some investment programs, etc. But we have a company called Rosneftegaz. The dividends from Rosneft, they don't go straight to the budget. It goes to Rosneftegaz first. So all this money ends up in the accounts of Rosneftegaz. So, this money, our money, why don't they go to the budget? They could be spent to improve the social sphere or something. Why? Why are they in these accounts? Maybe we should just take them.
Well, you represent a liberal business paper, and you're saying we need to take it away. Well, indeed, we do have the funds at Rosneftegaz, but it's absolutely transparent. They're under the control of the government. And we use some of the funds from that source for other projects. Last year and this year, Rosneftegaz issued additional money to finance projects in science and education. And this applies to the so-called mega grants. They will also earmark money for small aircraft production, for regional airlines. We'll also use their funds for big aviation projects and for the new aviation engine. Luckily, we have an engine. It's the first one in 29 years, and we also need a new one, like 30 tons, and together with the Chinese, we'll be able to build a new wide-body, long-range passenger jet. But, well, this is the coffers that we're going to use for extra projects. That's it. Thank you. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you so much for your patience. Good luck.